Good morning, everyone. A very warm welcome on behalf of the Istituto Affari Internazionali. Absolutely delighted to be co-hosting this conference together with the German Marshall Fund, which has been a long-term partner of the Institute for many, many years, in fact, several decades. So absolutely delighted to be hosting you today, and absolutely delighted to be hosting you in one of the first sort of side events of the Ukraine Reconstruction Conference. So when we started discussing the Reconstruction Conference with our Ministry of Foreign Affairs well over a year ago, there were some, of course, that had the hope, perhaps I should say the illusion, that by the time that we got to this year, we would be talking about a reconstruction conference in the context of a ceasefire. Others, most of us in the Institute here, thought that that was perhaps a little bit on the optimistic side, perhaps even a little bit on the naive side, and that most likely we would be holding this conference now in a context of ongoing war. But whether one sided on the part of the optimists or the pessimists, I think everyone was under no illusion that we would be having this conversation today in a context in which conflict with Russia would be going on. Whether that was a conflict in the context of a ceasefire or not in the context of a ceasefire, a situation of conflictuality with Russia was pretty much a given unless one was living in La La Land. Which basically means that a discussion about reconstruction now is a discussion about resilience, and a discussion about resilience is a discussion about security. And so in this respect, when we think about the Marshall Initiative today, and if we compare it to the Marshall Plan back then, we're obviously talking about fundamentally different contexts. The first was obviously a context in which war was over, and war was over given that there had been a victory. And of course, today we are talking about a Marshall Initiative in which we really have to work on the nexus between an ongoing war, a reconstruction, and resilience that needs to be fostered. And all this can only take place, as I said, if we actually double down on security. So as we have these conversations over the course of today, well, we're going to be talking about governance, both at the sort of macro national level, but then also at the local cities level. And as we talk about how external stakeholders can and should be chipping in, I think will be extremely important to really look at this triangulation, as I said, between reconstruction, resilience, and security. So with this, I really wish you an extremely productive discussion over the course of this morning. And as I said, absolutely delighted to have all of you today. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage Josh Rudolph.
Side event, sorry, in this year's version of GMF's annual URC side event, we are really deeply honored to co-host with IAI, which was from the beginning a year ago our top choice for a partner on this, given that we're focused here on issues of Ukrainian governance reform and the issues that you described, which nobody knows those issues here in Rome better than you, and the real pros that you have here at IAI at the Institute. So thank you for co-hosting with us. As a living memorial to the Marshall Plan, GMF2 has led over the past 3 years in framing the need for a modern Marshall Plan for Ukraine. Because as with in the 1940s, the imperative of our time is to keep dictatorship from pressing into Europe. But as Natalie said, there are of course differences. One is what you just described about the war is still going on, and so that reconstruction security nexus is important to remain front and center this week. And including discussion of weapons, that's all integrated into this conversation. Other differences, whereas the original Marshall Plan involved one country helping many, this will be many helping one. Instead of laying the foundation for the eventual creation of the EU, this will bring a new member into the EU. So in that strategic setting, the professional good governance of Ukraine's institutions that manage recovery, reconstruction, it's essential to meeting EU standards, to attracting over time the hundreds of billions of euros worth of investment capital that will be needed to rebuild Ukraine and rebuild it as the kind of modern European member state that Ukrainians are sacrificing for. So that's why we're here talking about Marshall Plan governance. And institutionalizing good governance, especially over such vast sums of money in a political economic system that's as complex as Ukraine, it's going to take a lot of strong partnership. So we are grateful to our partners today. Again, thank you to the Institute. Thanks to the Danish government and Autodesk and our other generous donors. Thanks to all of you for giving us your morning, for being here. And thanks to our lineup of honorable speakers, including some of Ukraine's most important international partners. I'm starting with the U.S. government. Jonathan Taylor is the Associate General Counsel at the U.S. International Development Finance Corporation, DFC. And Jonathan is particularly important for our discussion of recovery governance because he's the U.S. official in charge of implementing the natural resources deal, the U.S.-Ukraine Reconstruction Investment Fund. Speaking of the security nexus, the fund that will be capitalized with U.S. weapon supplies. As U.S. weapons cross into Ukraine, that's a source of equity into the fund. Having gotten to know Jonathan this year, I can tell you that Americans, Ukrainians, all of our allies are quite fortunate to have this work be led by someone who's not sitting back and letting it be a one-time good story, but instead actively operationalizing this partnership as a continual source of positive developments towards investment. So please, Jonathan, if you'd take the podium and tell us about the important work that you are leading, and thank you for being here.
Thank you very much, Josh, and to the German Marshall Fund and IAI for inviting me for this talk. So I will be brief because I could talk about this fund and the process for a very long time. But I'll give a sort of a brief overview of kind of, how we got here, where we are, and where we're going, and sort of maybe a couple of remarks on, conversations Josh and I have been having about the role of civil society and sort of going forward. So I think a lot of you know that this fund, I was involved in the fund from really quite the very beginning. It was a very small team within DFC that was asked by the Treasury Department and Secretary Bessent, the Secretary of Treasury, to support generating a fund, right? What is sometimes called the minerals deal, but really it's an investment fund that is anchored by the U.S. government, represented by DFC, and the Ukrainian government, represented by the PPP Agency of Ukraine, to basically create a joint vehicle whereby we will reinvest in Ukraine's reconstruction. And the Secretary Bessent has been very clear about from the beginning, this is about a joint effort to reconstruct, a partnership to reconstruct in Ukraine's future. And I think, seeing his remarks, it's been a very, heartening way messaging to, from the Trump administration to Ukraine and to Europe about being an effort to revitalize Ukraine looking forward for the very long term. So I think a couple things just to note about the fund. One is, the fund receives, it has seed capital coming from DFC, and we expect from the Ukrainian government. sort of in the near term, although that is just a small amount of capital, the majority of the capital is going to be coming from the 50% of royalties and revenues from Ukrainian hydrocarbons and minerals projects. Those we expect are going to take a long time to come in, years to come in, so there's going to be a matter of co-investment. And I think it's very important for sort of a European audience to understand from the very beginning of our negotiations and conversations, the expectation from DFC, and which we were very clear about with the Ukrainians, and sort of, I always like to tell European audiences this, we very much are looking forward to having co-investors come into any project that the fund invests in. One of the first questions, the two first questions that the Ukrainians asked us at the negotiating table, one is, are you looking to displace, European investment or IFI investment? And my response is absolutely not. This is very much a vehicle to crowd in investment from private sector, from European capital, from aligned, US capital, obviously, but also, other international financial institutions, development institutions, IFC, EBRD, other sort of, development banks, as well as private sector capital from the US and from other aligned countries, including European countries. And the second question I always got, which was a huge source of discussion from the Ukrainian side, is, do the terms of the deal in any way, could they in any way be seen as restricting EU accession from Ukraine? And our view is never was intended to have any negative implications for Ukraine's EU accession, and we worked extremely hard to make sure that the terms of the deal in no way implicated any negative implications for EU accession for Ukraine. So I think it's very clear under the current terms of the deal that it only has positive implications for Ukraine's future as an EU member state and its accession process. But that was frankly a lot of questions and concerns on this point. And I think where we got to by the end of the deal is very clear that this is a positive thing, in my opinion, my humble opinion, as one of the authors of the deal, for Ukraine's role as an EU member state. And obviously, sort of the big thing is is solidifying the U.S.-Ukrainian relationship going forward. And I think that over the past few days we've seen sort of some of the positive upshots of this. Hopefully, relationship staying solid. A couple things, just since Josh mentioned it, he talked about the arms serving as capital for the fund. Frankly, it's a pretty complicated concept, so I'll just clarify a little bit for this audience because I think we'll get questions on this. The arms count towards what is called the A shares of the fund for the U.S., which basically means when arms are, and this was a request specifically of the Ukrainian team, for going forward arms deliveries to Ukraine from the U.S. that are donated, that is considered essentially a deemed capital donation to the U.S. government, right, to the DFC. So it's not actually that the money goes into the fund for these arms, but it sort of counts towards our capital account. So when we make investments going forward, we'll get paid out sort of by assuming that those are like capital donations to by DFC. So it basically increases the amount of money that we will get when the fund eventually pays out in a decade or so. On the investments that we make. So it is in the interest of the U.S. to keep giving donations, and it's in the financial interest of the U.S., right, to give these military donations so that in the future, when the fund pays out, we'll essentially get paid back for those donations through the fund. That was a clear ask of the Ukrainians, and that was heavily negotiated, and that is in the agreement. I feel like sometimes it doesn't, frankly, get reported in the press that much, which is interesting, but that is definitely in the document, and Josh rightly pointed that out. A couple of points. Operationalization. So my colleague Will and I, who's here in the audience, and some others from DFC, spend about 16 hours a day trying to think about how to operationalize this fund. As we pointed out, we do not want to just have a signing a ceremony and walk away from this and declare victory. This is about actually investing. We're investors. DFC is an agency that does international investment, and that's what we care about. So we are here to operationalize the fund. We're hiring a lot of sort of supports within the fund to operationalize it. We need a back office. We need financial advisors to really kind of stand this thing up. We are working very hard every day with the Ukrainian counterparts to get those nuts and bolts in place. We're talking to them this week a lot. We've made an enormous amount of progress. We hope to really kind of have it more or less in place by year end, up and running and looking at real investments and making investments in the next couple of years. We're looking at pilot projects, a handful of pilot projects in the next couple of years that we're going to make investments in Ukraine. We're not waiting for the war to stop for us to make investments in sort of infrastructure, natural resources, mining, are the key sectors we're focusing on at the moment. Finally, talking about civil society, how it can help, state capacity of Ukraine is going to be very important for this fund to be successful. Like the mining licenses, the geological surveys, the maps, those are things that all are important for the fund's success. So to the extent that, civil society can help in those areas, we're, very supportive of that work, and happy to talk to any of you who want to learn more. So I think my time is up. I think I went over a little bit. Sorry about that. Thank you very much.
Could I please welcome to the stage our next speaker, Katarina Tarnova, EU Ambassador to Ukraine. Thank you.
Hello. Sorry I didn't get a chance to shake hands yet. I was led to a different room and didn't realize that you started already, so apologies for that. Rome is buzzing about Ukraine these 3 days, about reconstruction, and Moscow distracts. I don't know how many of you know, but last night was the largest ever since 2014, massive assault, combined assault with drones and missiles on Ukraine. The largest attack before was 539 unmanned vehicles and bombs. Last night was 741 drones and unmanned various decoy vehicles, plus among them were 6 ballistic and 7 cruise missiles. So I just would like you to capture that reality and understand in which kind of an environment we are talking about reconstruction that is actually happening, and the global uncertainty, the unpredictability, the mercurial decision-making, and the lack of sufficient pressure on Putin to stop this madness. I tell you, when you are woken up by sirens several times a night, it's not easy to function the next day. So last night, 741 drones, killer drones, and cruise and ballistic missiles were launched on Ukraine. Yet here we are to talk about reconstruction, so I'll switch gears, and I have 3 points to make. First, reconstruction is a continuum. It started a long time ago. There is no perfect time here that war stops, as we know, and reconstruction begins, because the destruction of people's lives, people's businesses, schools, kindergartens, hospitals, but also the economy and the roads that people drive through and bridges they need to cross is constant. So the reconstruction and early recovery has started pretty much right away. And it's actually happening at an amazing pace. I was in Zaporizhia, 25 kilometers from the front line a few weeks ago, and accompanied by Ivan Fedorov, the governor of Zaporizhia Oblast, which is now only partially controlled by Ukraine, showed me an underground hospital that was built, underground school for 450 kids in 2 shifts, 900 kids, that was built in 9 months at the cost of 2.3 million euros. 2.3 million euros, 7 meters underground, built in 9 months. So there is a lot happening already, but obviously the needs are enormous, and the EU, as the largest donor and partner to Ukraine, with over 150 billion euros in military, financial, humanitarian, and recovery help, has been doing its part, but obviously without the private sector, without the other like-minded partners, it's not going to be an easy task to reconstruct. But the first point is they are already very much on its way. And I was delighted to hear that we're talking about an investment fund rather than minerals deal. We were not quite sure what's going to come out after the initial drafts were published. So this is really a very good outcome. And as a general counsel, you have certainly done your part to bring it to this level, which is great news. My second point is that recovery happens in places, in communities. Physical infrastructure is somewhere in the large swath of Ukraine. And one of the challenges that will be there is to find the right balance between the decisions that need to take place at the central level, that have to take place at the central level, because the country will be shifting from a Moscow-centric model to West-centric model. We have worked a lot, USAID helped a lot with the solidarity lanes and building the corridors to Europe, but there is going to be a level of planning that needs to happen at central level. But it should not replace the decisions and the choices and the engagement with the local level. And I use the example of Ivan Fedorov, who does it locally. Sure, he needs to lobby and needs to find money, etc., but there is a lot of capability around the country. And I see Bastian in the last row, who leads the ULEAD project that the EU, Germany, France, maybe others over the last 10 years invested 230 million into supporting decentralization and capacity building for recovery. We have a specific program, EU for Recovery, that will be building this capacity so the Hromadas and the local level can be a good match and good partners to the central government and to the partners, to financial institutions, to other donors for this important discussion. And my last point is to say that I mentioned already recovery will not happen without the private sector. And what is the paramount two issues that every investor is going to be interested in? Obviously, security. That's why we have not so much, although it's coming, direct private investment. Good news is that those investors who invested prior to the full-scale invasion are in and are investing and are not leaving the country. So that's a good fundamentals, but governance obviously is going to be, and the rule of law, and meeting out the ridiculous perception that Ukraine is so corrupt, it's practically a failed state. The Russian propaganda that is massively massaging over the last 10, 15 years Western audiences, and they are very attuned to it. It's a country fighting corruption. It's not a country defined by corruption. But this needs to be, obviously, the reform momentum needs to be maintained. And this is where the civil society, where the think tank community like GMF, and the local vibrant think tank community, press, etc., are so pivotal also as the watchdogs and pushing the system to work well. I just would like to caution, and I did that with GMF a few times already, everybody wants to talk about, let's monitor the huge flows of money that they are spent well. Well, first, let's make sure the money gets there. The huge flows of money are not there. There is, in fact, a projected budget deficit quite large for next year, because the assumptions of financing were based on the war ending at the end of the year, which clearly is not going to be the case. So let's first make sure money gets there. And second, let's build the capacity to have projects that can absorb the money once they come in. And there is a dearth of projects, so only then comes the monitoring. So perhaps, and I'm not saying that this is the role of GMF, but the sprinkling of many other initiatives to always monitor. Monitoring is extremely important, and it needs to be thought about at the beginning, but also, and I hope the Rome conference that starts tomorrow will be a step in that direction. Let's make sure that the money for reconstruction for finding the government while in war is found and good projects come about, and then let's monitor their good use. Slava Ukraini!
Thank you, Ambassador Matanova, not only for being here, giving us your time in a busy week, but also just for being such a strong and reliable partner for all Ukrainians at the time when they need it more than ever. Thank you. And speaking of partnerships, we have a new one to announce now. I mentioned at the top that this forum on the eve of the URC is GMF's annual tradition. So it is this year an overdue pleasure to be joined on this stage by the current and former leadership of the Restoration Agency of Ukraine. Last year at our GMF side event, I moderated a panel. One of the panelists was going to be Valeria Ivanova, then deputy head of the agency. She and her boss, Mustafa Nayem, were blocked from leaving the country, so they resigned. GMF immediately took advantage and scooped up Valeria and brought her into GMF, where she is our senior fellow in Kyiv, leading GMF's research on recovery and reconstruction, including the publications that we have printed outside the door here, which you should grab. That is all going so well over the past year that we are launching a permanent GMF initiative led by Valeria, who's based in Kyiv. The Marshall Plan Initiative, as you see in the red banner here, the Marshall Plan Initiative is going to bring GMF into the process of civil society actors driving recovery policy development. And we are going to do it in Kyiv, Ukrainian style. You know, in most advanced democracies, watchdogs exist, but it's primarily, government bureaucrats who are entrusted to manage the policymaking process, write the laws, push for their passage, build the implementation tools. In Ukraine, it's partly because governing institutions over the centuries historically have been abused by either outside powers or inside, oligarchs to wield consolidated power. It's civil society who's been uniquely legitimate since the Revolution of Dignity, so that they take on a lot of those functions themselves, really active involvement in the policymaking process, in partnership with G7 allies and reformers in the parliament and in the government. And so Valeria will be leading those coalitions in Kyiv with respect to recovery issues, hiring some of the country's top analysts, doing it all with GMF's global platform and deep local understanding of the institutions in Kyiv, where we want to be helpful to the good work that those institutions are doing, including the Restoration Agency. So over the past year, I have been learning from Valeria about just how difficult the work is of leading Ukraine's Restoration Agency. They have to arrange far-flung details associated with big and sophisticated recovery projects. They need to do it all within a highly complex governing system in Kyiv. And so that requires the leadership of people like Serhiy Sukhomlin, head of the Agency of Restoration. For a decade before taking on this job, Serhiy was a mayor in Ukraine, which is the kind of job that requires both getting projects done and working within a political system. So, all of us in civil society, in the international community, should be working with him and with the agency, offering technical assistance and other forms of support. And that's what we are delighted to launch here today. GMF's new Marshall Plan initiative will, in just a minute, enter into a memorandum of understanding with the Restoration Agency, under which GMF will provide institutional capacity support to the agency in areas of transparency, accountability, civic engagement, cooperating to make infrastructure recovery a tool for strengthening democracy, rule of law, and integrity-based governance. So, Serhii, if you would, I will come sit next to you, and we will sign this memo, and please, if you would want to say a few words for a minute, you can do so right here. I can just come to you.
Перше, хочу сказати, хочу подякувати за підтримку.
The first thing that I would like to say thanks for the support.
На сьогодні процес відновлення в Україні відбувається фактично, ми відновлюємо те, що руйнується сьогодні.
The restoration process in Ukraine today is just like we are restoring the infrastructure that is damaged every day.
Але нам на сьогодні потрібно змінювати підходи і пропрацьовувати комплексне відновлення України після закінчення війни.
We should do the restoration process comprehensively and continue doing it after the war will be finished.
І я хочу подякувати фонду Маршалла за допомогу агентству в посиленні саме сильної спроможності агенції.
I would like to say thanks to the Marshall Fund for the support and for the institutional support for the Agency for Restoration.
І ще маленький сюрприз. Я хочу на пам'ять подарувати маленький ліхтарик, зроблений із бетону. Це не простий бетон, це бетон зруйнованих будинків міста Харкова, Бучі, Бородянки, перероблений і на згадку про те, що нове світло буде давати людям нове життя в Україні.
And I have a little surprise for everybody. It is the thing, the light of home. It is the thing that the sculpture that is made from the concrete, from the debris in Borodyanka and Bucha and also Kharkiv. And it means the hope of the people of Ukraine.
Thank you again, Serhii, for that warm establishment of our partnership, and really looking forward to working together with you, as I hope that many in this room will with the agency. Really critical partner for us all. And so now I guess the last thing that I will say before leaving the stage is that, again, this is a recovery process that should tee up Ukraine's EU accession. So with that in mind, I'm honored to hand the podium over to moderate the first panel, GMF's Ukrainian thought leader in Brussels, known to many of you as a fixture of Ukraine's reformed civil society since being on the streets of the Maidan and working on these issues ever since then for more than a decade, and a leader of Ukraine's diaspora here in Europe, Olena Prokopenko.
Thank you, Josh. Good morning, dear esteemed colleagues. It is our absolute honor to host this important conversation ahead of the Ukraine Recovery Conference. We are humbled to see such an overwhelming response to this discussion today, and to see so many good friends and colleagues in the room, to see so many valued partners here with us today. As you know, despite unprecedented challenge of warding off Russia's full-scale invasion and moving forward EU membership, Ukraine is still making impressive progress on its recovery track. This is the fourth recovery conference we are witnessing, we're participating in, following URCs in Lugano, in London, in Berlin. And we can all, I believe, see that year after year, these discussions become increasingly hands-on. They become increasingly in-depth and more nuanced, more informed as we understand the needs on the ground better and as we understand how to address those needs. And yet, in over 3 years of recovery, after 3 years of non-stop recovery efforts, Ukraine still struggles to put together effective recovery infrastructure and to ensure smooth coordination between seemingly countless actors involved. There is still no law on recovery, unfortunately. There is no strategy on recovery in Ukraine, and the capacity of institutions on all levels, really, on national, regional, and local levels, the capacity of those institutions is really still very limited. So in the course of this panel, we would like to discuss with representatives of the Ukrainian government, of the civil society, of Ukraine's international partners, how this fragmented and often reactive rather than proactive infrastructure of recovery can be transformed into a more sustainable governance architecture that would be able to plan long-term and to manage large-scale recovery projects. And today we're happy to have with us a distinguished lineup of speakers who will help us navigate the complex landscape of Ukraine's reconstruction. I'm delighted to present to you Serhiy Sukhomlin, Head of State Agency for Recovery Infrastructure Development of Ukraine. We will later be joined by Gabriel Blank, Team Leader for Ukraine Reconstruction at DGNS, at the European Commission. We're also joined by Yuman Lee, who is lead economist and program leader for prosperity Eastern Europe at the World Bank, and Valeria Ivanova, our senior fellow at GMF, and as you know, former deputy head of the Recovery Agency. We have only 45 minutes for this panel, so I will really ask our speakers to be very mindful of time and to take about 5 minutes for their introductory remarks, and then we will engage with you in the Q&A format. So to get us started, I'd like to turn it over to Ukraine, to the Ukrainian government, namely to you, Serhiy, as head of the Recovery Agency. It seems to be a common misperception among many donors that the agency is in charge of all recovery in Ukraine. Whereas if we look at the actual powers that you have, that the agency has, they are quite limited, to be honest, from what it seems to be in our view. And most decision-making related to the planning of the projects, to distribution of responsibilities between your agency and the local communities, all of those powers seems to still be in the cabinet minister's hands. And that's why it looks like the agency may often be unaware of what projects it will have to be implementing in the next few months. And this makes it very difficult to plan ahead, let alone to plan long-term. At the same time, expectations from the partners remain very high, and the capacity of the implementing agencies and institutions remains very low. How do you see the role of the agency in this environment, and how do you see your place in the current architecture? But also, what are you lacking in terms of powers? What would you need to change on the legislative level, on the practical level, so that you could be even more effective and to streamline your efforts? The floor is yours, Serhiy, for 5 minutes.
На сьогодні в Україні тільки в Київській області було зруйновано 29 тисяч об'єктів.
More than 29,000 objects were destroyed only in the Kyiv region of Ukraine.
На сьогодні під час війни відновлено приблизно 23 тисячі об'єктів.
approximately 23,000 of objects have been already restored in the Kyiv region.
Агентство паралельно проводить роботу по комплексному відновленню 5 населених пунктів.
Simultaneously, the Agency for Restoration is responsible for the comprehensive restoration, rebuilding of the 5 towns in Ukraine.
І на базі цього досвіду ми відпрацьовуємо абсолютно нові підходи, нові рішення і нові механізми більш ефективного відновлення.
And on the basis of this experience, the Agency for Restoration is drafting the new approaches to the restoration process at all.
Головна ціль агентства – зробити компетентність в агентстві, ефективність і прозорість.
So our aim in the Agency for Restoration for today is to have the competence to make restoration process obvious and clear.
На сьогодні ми змінили структуру агентства.
We have already changed the structure of the agency.
Ми сконцентрували експертизу і спроможності в реалізації об'єктів в одній структурі. Раніше вони були розпорошені по регіонам.
So we decided to make an accent that the restoration process will be centralized just in one organization in the agency, because, for example, earlier it was decentralized on the regions.
В нас створено Центральна закупівельна організація. Я хочу подякувати Європейській антикорупційній ініціативі за процедуру проведення відбору директора цієї структури, і найближчі дні вона вже починає працювати.
We have opened a centralized procurement organization, and I would like to say thanks to the European Anti-Corruption Initiative that has helped us to choose the head of the CPO of the centralized procurement organization. And I also would like to add that in the nearest day we will know the head of the CPO.
Ми створили центри експертизи, 4 центри експертизи по кожному напрямку, по якому працює агентство. Вода, сектор енергетики, енергоефективності, цивільне будівництво і дороги, дорожня інфраструктура.
Also, we created in our agency 4 expertise centers for our 4 main sectors. So the first one is for energy and for the energy efficiency. The second one, road sector, civil infrastructure, and water sector.
Задача цих центрів – експертизи, в яку входять провідні українські інститути, міжнародні консультанти від наших партнерів, розробляти інші підходи до відновлення, більш ефективні.
The most professional experts are included as representatives of these expertise centers, the representatives of our institutions, of our institutes, and famous and expertised organizations.
Другою дуже важливою задачею цих експертних центрів – це розробка критеріїв пріоритизації проєктів, які знаходяться в дрімі.
The second task for these expertise centers is to create new criteria to prioritize the objects that are already on the DREAM platform.
На сьогодні на базі платформи 5 Case Models ми розробили вже критерії оцінки пріоритизації проєктів по сектору води.
On the basis of 5 case model, we have already drafted new criteria in order to prioritize the objects, the infrastructure in the water sector.
І третій напрямок – це відповідальність об'єктів відновлення, місцеві стратегії, регіональні стратегії і національні стратегії.
And the third task for the expertise center is to understand whether this object of infrastructure is going to be rebuilt or restored in accordance with the local policy, with local strategy, with the regional strategy and the state strategy.
Як результат, можу показати приклад Миколаївського водогону. Це водогін, який забезпечує місто Миколаїв. Ми почали будівництво цього об'єкту в лютому місяці. В серпні місяці в Миколаєві вже буде вода.
The bright example is Mykolaiv, a water pipeline. We have started the works on construction of Mykolaiv water pipeline in February 2025, and I can say that in August 2025 it will be finished.
175 мільйонів євро була попередня вартість проєкту. На сьогодні ми закінчуємо цей проєкт з вартістю 125 мільйонів євро.
The first price for the construction of this water pipeline was 175 million euros, and for now, after the expertise center worked well, did they work, the price for this water pipeline is 125 million euros.
Експертні ради відпрацьовують проекти разом з громадами, ті проекти, які покривають потреби дуже великої кількості громад.
Expertise centers are working together with the territorial communities in order to draft the comprehensive decisions for the infrastructure projects that will provide the decision for a lot of people, for a lot of population of Ukraine.
Це ми допомогли виготовити ТЕО на 75 громад по будівництву сонячних електростанцій для їх водоканалів.
We have drafted 75 preliminary studies for the territorial communities of Ukraine.
Ми розрахували для 450 українських громад заміну вуличного освітлення і разом будемо з громадами реалізовувати цей проєкт.
We have calculated the change of electricity for the 450 territorial communities in Ukraine.
Також ми відпрацювали новий підхід в будівництві укриттів для українських громад, які потрібні і для шкіл, і для лікарень, і для дитячих садочків.
And so we have drafted the new decision, the new approach for the modular shelter that will be used in territorial communities of Ukraine, for example, at social infrastructure, schools and kindergartens.
Тільки 180 прифронтових громад потребують приблизно 3000 таких укриттів.
Nearly 150 territorial communities that are located near the front line need nearly 3,000 modular shelters.
І якщо стаціонарне класичне укриття будується приблизно 2 роки, в середньому 2 роки, і коштує достатньо багато, то ці модульні укриття, які ми завтра будемо показувати, елементи цих укриттів завтра будемо показувати на URC, вони монтуються за 1 тиждень і коштують приблизно в 5 разів дешевше.
I would like to say that in order to build one classic shelter, it will take for nearly 2 years to construct it. And I also can say you that tomorrow, for example, we will present for you also the new decision, the modular shelters.
Окрім цього, вже вчора почав працювати новий сайт агентства українською англійською мовою, на якому один із розділів це дашборди.
Also yesterday the new website of the Agency for Restoration has been already started its work, and here you can say in English and in Ukrainian, here you can see the useful information.
Sergey, I'm sorry, I think you have 30 seconds to finish and then we can engage with you in the Q&A.
Нам необхідно змінювати правила гри по відновленню України.
We should change the rules of game in order to restore our country.
Сучасна система фінансування проєктів, вона довга і не дозволяє ефективно реалізовувати проєкти.
Modern financial mechanism to restore Ukraine, unfortunately, don't work in practically.
Нам необхідний окремий фонд, який буде фінансувати відновлення України.
We need a separate fund that will finance the restoration process of Ukraine.
І нам потрібен новий закон України про відновлення, який вже сьогодні напрацьовується.
and we need the new law of restoration of Ukraine that is being drafted now.
Дякую.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sergio. Thank you especially for emphasizing the need for a separate law on recovery, and we will be talking about this more during the panel. And thank you for all your heroic work and the work of your team to restore and recover Ukraine in this very challenging environment. And I'm happy that we're now joined by Gabriel Blanc, team leader for reconstruction at DG Nest European Commission. Gabriel, welcome. And I wanted to ask you about Ukraine facility first. As we all know, Ukraine facility has proven to be a very powerful catalyst of many reforms in Ukraine, and it has provided a strong boost for not only recovery, but also for Ukraine's EU accession efforts. But when we talk to our partners in the Ukrainian parliament and in the larger reform community, we'll often hear from them that the conditionalities under the facility, under the Ukraine plan, could be utilized more effectively, and that the Commission could be more strict with Ukraine, could be stricter with Ukraine when it comes to assessing Ukraine's compliance. What is your assessment of the effectiveness of Ukraine facility as an instrument? And then I would also appreciate if you could briefly comment on the project preparation facility and the public investment management reforms, and how promising do you believe those instruments are? The floor is yours, Gabriel, for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. No, I'm not very lucky with the microphone. Yes, now it should be working. Hello, and very sorry that I was a bit late. That's very nice to be here today. I'm very honored to have been invited to speak today. So when I was on the way, of course, from the airport, actually, my mind was not really with the Ukraine facility, but reading the news of this anti-record of the night, and so obviously that's what I have in mind at first. And then I looked at the name of the meeting room that we have today, Spinelli, and I think that this resonates also very much with what we are discussing today, and with the fact that it is from a fascist jail, actually, that Spinelli wrote a manifesto that was laying the ground of what would become then the European Union, and so that it's the midst of the war that actually the bright ideas for the future of Europe were elaborated, and obviously it resonates with what's happening in Ukraine today. Then, indeed, coming to the facility, maybe I should start to mention that it's just more than 1 year that it is operational, and actually, in a bit more than 1 year, we already contributed to 20 billion euro to the Ukrainian budget. So this is obviously a significant amount. And that the reforms that are attached to these disbursements are also significant. We are speaking all in all out of the Ukraine plan about more than 45 laws that should be adopted by Ukraine. So the ambition is there. And actually we see that very important reforms were made in relation with, just to give examples, in relation with reforms of state-owned enterprises, in relation with the National Climate and Energy Plan, which was adopted, also in relation with public investment management, actually, and I will come back to it. So I think that we see a government at work to deliver on the reforms in the plan. And the 2 points I wanted to flag in direct relation to your remarks. First one is that the level of scrutiny is extremely high on the reforms that are adopted by Ukraine under this plan. This is not only the Commission assessing the compliance with the reforms, this is also the Council, meaning the member states of the European Union, that are also looking at this. So there is a very high level of scrutiny to ensure that indeed the reforms that Ukraine is committed to implement are fulfilled. The second thing is that if you look at other similar instruments that we have now in place with other countries in the Western Balkans, for instance, the level of ambition in the Ukraine plan, and so as part of these conditionalities for payment, it's not possible to say that it's below what is done in the Western Balkans. So despite the war context, actually the ambition of the Ukraine facility on its first pillar is something that remains extremely high. So turning now indeed to public investment management and project preparation, I think that this is also one of the added value of the Ukraine plan and of combining in one document reforms that are pertaining to different sectors. It is also flagging reforms that are essential in the longer run for the reconstruction of the country. Amongst them, indeed, public investment management is a flagship reform of the government, which basically will provide progressively full transparency, full accountability on any public investments that will be done in the country, irrespective of the sources of the fund. The ambition is quite high, and we believe this is indeed one of the fundament for the reconstruction of the country. Also, we have the figures that you know from the World Bank RDNA, and further analyses that were made in relation with what the private sector can cover. Actually, 2/3 would remain public expenditure. So having an emphasis on public investment management is extremely relevant. In view of ensuring that public investment management functions, there should be good public projects. And so that's where indeed the project preparation kicks in, and the importance of mobilizing the relevant expertise in view of preparing good public projects that will then be entered into the public investment management system. And so that's what we are doing. We were very glad to see the progress made in establishing within the government a project preparation unit, which will play a key role. And we are also financing project preparation facilities that will actually mobilize expertise in view of preparing good public projects. I did not check the time. I don't know if it's over or not. Maybe I
think it is. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Gabriel. And yeah, let's hope that in the coming months, Ukraine's compliance under Ukraine facility proves to be more and more effective, and that civil society could also agree with your optimistic assessment, which was very good to hear. But we'll see if civil society actors in this room agree with your assessment later in this discussion. And now I'd like to turn it over to Human Lee, representing the World Bank. The World Bank has been with Ukraine every step of the way in this recovery process for over 3 years now. The World Bank helped Ukraine to develop procedures for prioritization of recovery projects. It helped assess the damages across the country. It supported the development of the regional recovery plans and much more. Given the critical role of the public investment management reform that Gabriel already commented on, given the critical role of this reform in streamlining the recovery, how do you see this reform moving forward? Do you believe it's moving forward? It's moving in the right direction at the moment, and if so, what do you expect from this mechanism? Do you believe that it will be a game changer in organizing and making recovery more predictable and more effective? And also about the capacity of the implementing actors, how do you believe we should approach building the capacity, especially on the local level where it's clearly very, very lacking? The floor is yours, Human Lee, for 5 minutes.
Thank you. We could spend the whole day talking about this. So just want to start by saying thank you for the invite. I'm based in Kyiv, and I was just reflecting on what the EU ambassador says, which is that Ukraine, when you take a step back, is when you say, is Ukraine doing enough? You have to remember that Ukraine is actually reconstructing, restoring, and reforming whilst under nightly attacks, right? And yeah, so, and I just want us to all have that context in mind. So following on from Gabrielle's point, so I think the PIM reform is extremely essential. Having a planning, a prioritization system both at the central level and the local government level. And Ukraine has made incredible progress on this. So for the first time, we have a single project pipeline, okay? And that's no mean feat. We have a system where the Ministries of Finance, Ministries of Economy, and Ministry of Development have gatekeeper roles, defined gatekeeper roles, and it's coordinated. There's more to do. So the next step is the rollout of the PIM system to the local government level. So using the same methodology, using on the DREAM platform, to all the hromadas. Now, of course, that requires a significant amount of capacity building of the hromadas on the PIM methodology. And this is where both development partners as well as civil society has an important role to play. And it will just be important that in this rollout that there is coordination, that we are doing this sort of, not to centralize capacity building because there's just too much to centralize, it's not practical, but to make sure that there is a common methodology that is being used, for example. On the project preparation facility, again, and I think this is an example, I think, where the development partners, there's good coordination, right? So the World Bank is also putting financing towards the government's project preparation facility. In fact, we're announcing an investment project during this URC of $45 million. And then on the PIM reform, we are actually supporting the government to do the PIM reforms through a program for results called SURGE, which basically we disperse based on results. So, for example, the single project pipeline was a result. And we're also doing additional financing for SURGE of, I think, 100, I forget the number, over 100 million, again, that we're announcing at the URC. So I think the PIM and the whole reform is an example of where the development partners are actually really coordinated and in sync and using different financing instruments and programs to support. This is going to be a hard task, especially when you roll it out to the local government level, no doubt. And then I just want to use my last minute to talk about reform. So we've talked about reconstruction and restoration. And if you look at the original Marshall Plan, for Europe, actually it was about financing, huge amounts of financing, huge amounts of reconstruction, but it was also about reforms and policy, opening up the European market. It was a huge part of that agenda. So I just want to come back, whenever we talk about recovery and reconstruction and restoration, we also have the fourth R, which is the reforms. Ukraine cannot wait to do the reforms. It needs to do the reforms for EU accession. It needs to do the reforms for high growth. Why do we need high growth? Because with growth, the government has the budget to spend it on things like reconstruction and so forth. We need the reforms to bring in the private capital. So the RDNA, $524 billion over 10 years, cannot be done by the public sector by itself, just simply can't afford it. It will need to bring in the private capital. How do you bring in the private capital? You need to de-risk, you need to reform. So I just want to emphasize that in all this discussion about recovery, it's not just about the physical infrastructure, it's really about the reforms. And this is why the work of the Ukraine, there's the Ukraine facility, but even more importantly, the Ukraine plan. And then also, of course, the other reform programs, the IMF programs, the World Bank budget support programs where we're supporting reforms is so critical, right, in parallel to the physical reconstruction agenda. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Yumen, and especially for emphasizing the need for all the critical reforms you outlined, particularly in the private sector, that don't get to be discussed, I think, as broadly as they deserve to. And now I'd like to turn it over to back to Kiev, to Valeria Ivanova, to our senior fellow and former deputy head of the Recovery Agency. Valeria, you served in the agency leadership until a year ago, and you observed firsthand how the recovery ecosystem in general has been shifting and changing and evolving over the past 3 years. You also recently authored policy reports on the ways to improve Ukraine's recovery legislation and the pricing of reconstruction projects. In your view, what is currently lacking on the legislative level when it comes to organizing effective recovery and how to improve legislation around it? Also, beyond legislative level, I'd like to ask you how the political component of the process, how the political rivalry, if I may, influences the effectiveness of the recovery and how much of a disruptive factor is it? The floor is yours, Valeria, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Elena. Thank you for the question. In the past 3.5 years, a national recovery strategy has been changing all the time. But much of this adoption has been more about reactive than strategic. So we now have many new regulation, rules, government states, working groups, and other issues, but they are not part of the coordinated system. We have a good steps like PPF, PIM. It's really, I believe, success step, but it's not enough. And this is core problem because during this time, the most important project in Ukraine, most costly and most important project, largest project in Ukraine, have mostly been implemented through experimental government resolution. This applied to water pipeline, reaction to destroyed Kakhovka Dam, protection substation, comprehensive recovery project, social projects, etc., etc. So this resolution made it possible to launch project quickly, but they did not provide sustainable long-term solution. It was a response to a critical situation more than long-term solution. So in this kind of decision, some important proceedings were often skipped, and it was decided who would implement the project and how. So on the one hand, we have a quick decision where necessary because it's war. And the other hand, we have a problem because we lost losing accountability and transparency during the implementation project. So, for example, the government still decide manually who exactly will do certain projects. It's a state agency or local authority, but that's not how it should be. And there are many examples like that. I remember that a lot of approved and still in development procedures and criteria for project prioritization. Anytime it's something new. So one of the most serious structural problem is gap and lack of a national strategy of recovery. In Lugano and London, different version of the recovery strategy we shared, but none of them has become a real plan, a real national strategy, recovery strategy. Because of that, priorities keep changing. He has a problem with coordination, we have a problem with donors, and we should discuss about that more. So national strategy is not about just to set priorities, but to define the architecture of institution needs to coordinate and deliver recovery effectively. Because a national strategy is needed to coordinate state bodies for clear distribution of funding, and for business. Without it, we will always have ineffective solutions. So now we have a situation, unfortunately, where the government decides to restore something and then decides that it would be not provide more funding for it, and we have a problem with that, and we should develop a national strategy of recovery. So as part of this, it's also important to talk about structure of the recovery institution, because and to rethink it after 3 years of full-scale invasion. Currently, Ukraine uses a number of financial and coordination instruments, among which the Ukraine facility is one of the main ones. However, its effectiveness directly depends on the creation of system management tools and institutions with clear power. Now we have the recovery agency, but it's a project implement bodies. The agency doesn't not coordinate all recovery. Yes, and the agency doesn't not create and coordinate single standard recovery process. It does not have such power. Because now we have many stakeholders in the recovery process, and they all do different things many times, so we need a unified legislation framework for recovery. And Sergei Sukhamlin says that we need a recovery law. It's true. As for now, we don't have a unified law, and it's bad. How do we work with this project? How we act in different situations, etc. So I think important talk about capacity also. Because if we are talking about sustainable institutional architecture, we need to talk about the capacity of state bodies and local authorities to implement project. We have many problems with this, and it's no secret. The problem is the fact that partners spend money often on experts and technical support in state body, but companies and private companies provide this technical support, but often we don't build this sustainable institution and state body.
1 minute, okay.
Okay. Consultant, leave, and person who is responsible for a huge amount of money, for example, at recovery agency, has a salary of $400 per month. And then we ask the head of the agency how things are going. So it's also important to talk about increasing the capacity of agency, increasing the capacity of local authority. So I believe that Ukraine facility, PPF and PIM, is a new and important experience for all of us, a positive one. Just like the reform in public investment procurement and the developed project preparation facility, which our colleague mentioned earlier and mentioned today, it can really help improve the current situation. And this change to move from emergency response to a more structured, strategic and professional recovery. But for this to work, we need to connect all the points. It's about strategy, legislation, institution, and people. Without this complex picture, even the best tools don't give the results. So we all hope for. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Valeria. And yeah, sounds like the recovery is still very much centralized on the national level, and a lot more structure needs to be brought into this process. And I hope you all check out Valeria's papers that you can pick up on the way from this event that would give you a deeper understanding of what this recovery infrastructure could look like and how it could become more effective and more efficient. And now I have a few minutes for a couple of rounds of questions for our speakers. And I think both Gabriel and Yuman mentioned the issues of coordination between the actors involved. And I think both of you alluded to the fact that on the level of international partners, coordination is actually happening the way it should, and it's relatively effective. What do you think could be done in order to streamline this coordination in the broader sense between international partners and Ukrainian authorities, and also between Ukrainian authorities? Because we often see, including with the PIM reform, that some of the government actors have competing agendas when it comes to this reform. What would be your suggestion as to how to approach this coordination and make it more effective, both humanly and Gabriel, if you could weigh in on this briefly.
Yes, thank you. I will start stating the obvious, and that's also a reflection in relation to the Marshall Plan. You had one superpower and with many countries benefiting. Here you have one country, Ukraine, with many different partners helping. No, so it makes the coordination challenge very different, and actually it puts also Ukraine at the central place. And I believe that Ukraine has the agency which is needed to coordinate its international partner. And that's what we see in many practical cases, including the PIM reform and what has been happening with project preparation over the past few months. But indeed, I believe this is very important that this coordination effort is led by Ukrainians themselves. What we see is that we have a mechanism of coordination which is called the Ukraine Donor Platform, where main partners of Ukraine are represented, and so this is something which is very relevant, and there will be meeting of the steering committee and ministerial meeting in the next couple of days, which is an important forum for Ukraine also to communicate its needs. And what we see as well, this is something that we have been establishing as part of the Ukraine facility, is the Ukraine investment framework. Mm-hmm. And so this is a more operational setup where the European Union, together with the government of Ukraine, the member states and the main financial institutions that are active in Ukraine are allocating resources, guarantees for financing institutions to be able to operate in Ukraine, but also grants. And this works very well. And we see that together with the government, there is a possibility to indeed arbitrate and focus the support that is providing through these financing institutions. And this is really operational coordination of the resource available to make sure that it goes to where it's the most needed.
Thank you. Do you agree with this assessment, Yumina?
Yeah, I just want to emphasize this point that this leadership for coordination across the development partners needs to come from the government, right? Because precisely you have many to, and this is happening. So I mean, amongst, so there's a reform delivery office in the PM's office, and I'll just give you an example. They asked the World Bank to do some thinking, to help them do some thinking on the sort of post-war economic policy framework, and they specifically asked us to coordinate with the EU, with the IMF, with the OECD, with the EBRD, and that we did, right? And of course, even without this request, would we have done it? Ideally, but I mean, it was important that the government made that specific request, right? That kind of, please coordinate, make sure it's coordinated. Another example is on the reform side, the Ministry of Finance has a reform matrix where you find all the reforms from the Ukraine plan, from the IMF program, from World Bank budget support operations, plus other. Again, I would ask anybody who's working in this space, before you ask the government to do another reform, check the reform matrix. Is it already there? You know, so that you don't duplicate or rather complement. So I think that, you know, that leadership needs to come from the governments, and then of course the development partners need to all, you know, rather than go off and do our favorite things, we need to tap into what is already there. Thanks.
Thank you. Yeah, I agree it should come from the government, but I would also suggest that the agency should probably have more powers to weigh in this process, right? So it shouldn't be the cabinet of ministers only that should lead this process, but the agency should assume more and more powers as it becomes more experienced in this process, so that it can cooperate with the cabinet of ministers and not only receive the tasks from the cabinet of ministers as to which projects it is supposed to implement. Thank you once again for your answers. And as we're hosting this event on the eve of the Ukraine Recovery Conference starting tomorrow, I'd like to hear from all of you, what do you believe would make this conference a truly resultful event? What would make it an event that goes beyond discussions per se, but becomes a set of actionable steps agreed by the partners? What would be the metric for you to assess the effectiveness of this next few days, next 2 days of the URC? Serhiy, would you like to give your brief comment on that within 30 seconds, please?
Ну, по-перше, ми дійсно вивчали різні моделі відновлення, і одна з найуспішніших – це був план Маршалла для Німеччини з окремим фондом, з відносно простими, але в той же час ефективними механізмами фінансування.
First of all, I would like to say that we studied different methods of restoration process, and for example, Marshall plans plan that helped, for example, many years ago to restore countries is one of the most effective.
На сьогодні війна змінила все. Вона змінила демографію, вона змінила економіку, вона змінила логістику.
Logistics, demography, and the whole system of the country was changed due to the war.
На сьогодні для нас дуже важливо нові стратегії по відновленню, нова стратегія по відновленню України і пріоритезація проєктів. Бо ми чітко розуміємо, що фінансового ресурсу недостатньо на сьогодні, і це процес.
The new strategy for Ukraine's recovery is significant, is paramount, and we should understand the priorities of restoration process.
Thank you.
Другий
Sri.
момент
Yeah.
це
We need
одна
to-
секунда. Другий момент це приватний бізнес. Без приватних інвестицій ефективне відновлення України неможливо.
And without private investment, the restoration process of Ukraine is unfortunately impossible.
І завтра ми будемо теж показувати багато проєктів, представляти, які можуть бути профінансовані, в тому числі приватним бізнесом.
And for example, tomorrow we will show a lot of cases where the projects can be financed by the private sector.
І громади, опора на громади і співпраця з українськими громадами – це та сила, яка зробить цей процес більш швидким і ефективним.
And the accent for the cooperation with the territorial communities, because without this cooperation, the restoration process is impossible.
Thank you, Serhii. Yuman, what is your, what would make this conference effective for you? How would you assess it?
Thanks very much. I think, to be honest, I think that question is actually best answered by the Ukrainian government. I really believe that. Because I think we, as I say, this goes back to this point of leadership, right, and coordination. I think this conference comes, it's a particularly tricky time. I mean, of course, there's always been uncertainty since the start of the full-scale invasion. But, you know, right now, I think if you were thinking about this conference from 5 months ago, you would have been thinking about this conference to really focus on kind of recovery and reconstruction. I think the reality of today, and as Katarina mentioned last night, we are now, I think, in a different place. So I think the government has an incredibly hard job to be thinking about the war, as well as recovery and reconstruction, all at the same time. And I think the balance between that, whether it comes from where the financing, where the financing will go, and the prioritization of where to focus on those efforts, I think this is a very hard question. And I would like to see, I think, coming out of this conference, maybe people being on the same page in terms of, given the situation where we are now, what do we need to focus on in terms of these different things? So it's not a very concrete answer, but I think it's partly because I do think that right now it's very challenging to be even thinking about what should we be focusing on given the actual situation on the ground.
Yeah, it really is. Thank you. Thank you very much. Gabriel?
Yes, so I very much agree with you. I think indeed the clear and strong voice of the Ukrainian government is something that is very important and that would actually drive our work in the next months. So this is something essential. And maybe because we also will have a lot of companies present at this URC, and so we hope there could be deals. We know the interest amongst the European companies is raising, and so that could materialize. That would be fantastic.
Yeah, let's hope so. Thank you. Valeria, maybe 30 seconds from you. What would make this conference a success?
I will be brief because we don't have a time. At URC, I expect a long-term commitment to Ukraine, not just about finance, but institutional.
Thank you, Valeria. And yes, we are approaching the end of this panel. And I hope next year, when we discuss Ukraine's recovery, we will truly discuss post-war recovery, and that by then Ukraine's territorial integrity and sovereignty will have been restored. Please join me in thanking our distinguished panelists. Please also make sure to pick up our latest publications on Ukraine's recovery, on public administration reform, and other topics that we at GMF are focusing on. And if some of you are not members of GMF's Ukraine Reform Working Group yet, please contact us and we'll be happy to include you in this platform that, as of now, unites over 250 experts and officials around the world working on Ukraine, and we would be honored to have you with us. We will now take a quick break, and our next panel on local recovery will start in 15 minutes. Thank you again for joining us, and Slava Ukraini.
We will have a 5-minute coffee break. The coffee finds itself at the back of the room, and we invite you back here very shortly. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Hannah Abdullah. I'm a senior fellow with the GMF Cities program. It's great to see you all here and so many of you who I've only met virtually before in person. So far, we've had a high-level policy discussion and we'll now take it down a level, namely to the city level. Because as Ambassador Maternova mentioned earlier this morning, recovery happens in places, and we want to talk more about those places where recovery actually happens. Today marks a major milestone for GMF and especially our cities program. Over the past year, we've been building out a new initiative called the Ukraine Cities Partnership for Sustainable Local Recovery, short UCP, and many of you here in the room with us have been part of that journey. UCP is very much inspired by the original Marshall Plan in that it brings together transatlantic and cross-sector partners to support the sustainable, resilient, and inclusive recovery of up to 3 smaller Ukrainian cities. It's really very much a cross-sector partnership in the sense that it includes US and European businesses, NGOs, universities, city associations, and others who will pool their resources and knowledge to support impactful solutions on the ground. Because even with the war continuing, we believe that recovery planning must start now, especially at the local level. It must drive economic growth, encourage citizens to stay and return, help integrate IDPs, and align with EU standards. UCP, the project which we're launching, well, not launching, but I'll say a bit more about it in a moment, but UCP will focus on a couple of key issues to help build local capacity, including civic engagement, democratic governance, urban planning, engineering and infrastructure, project finance, and public-private partnerships. Our overarching goal is to empower the cities that we'll work with to pilot new and innovative solutions and serve as inspiring and replicable models for other cities across Ukraine. And on that note, I'm extremely pleased to announce today that the first city to join UCP is Korosten. Korosten is located in Zhytomyr Oblast and about 150 kilometers west of Kiev. And those of you who have traveled on the Kiev Express from Warsaw will have passed through it, so you already know it to some extent. And we're deeply honored to have with us the mayor of Korosten, Vladimir Moskalenko. Mr. Moskalenko, GMF looks forward to working with you and your team, and we've already been very impressed by your vision, your energy, and your leadership. And I'd kindly ask you to join me on stage. And accompanying Mr. Moskalenko is Ms. Alina Semenenko, Head of International Cooperation at Korosten City Council, and she's kindly agreed to translate his remarks.
Шановні учасники конференції, пані і панове, для мене сьогодні велика честь представляти Коростенську міську громаду на цьому важливому майданчику, який об'єднує лідерів, партнерів, представників громадських, міжнародних організацій, ті, хто займається відновленням України.
Dear participants, ladies and gentlemen, it is a great honor for me to speak on behalf of the Korosten urban territorial community and this important platform that brings together leaders, experts, community representatives and international partners united by a common goal, the recovery and the modernization of Ukraine.
Ми щиро вдячні німецькому фонду Маршалла США за запрошення та можливість стати частиною спільноти, яка перетворює слова в реальні дії, в реальні справи.
We are sincerely grateful to the German Marshall Fund for inviting us and the opportunity to become part of a community which turns the words into real actions.
Для Коростенської громади долучення до партнерства з німецьким фондом Маршалла – це надзвичайно цінна можливість. По-перше, ми отримуємо доступ до досвіду інститутів, які можуть мати і бути офіційно займатися будівництвом, перестройкою. По-друге, це шляхи для партнерства з іншими містами, по обміну досвідом, реальних спільних проєктів, які ми можемо спільно реалізувати.
For the Corostin community, joining the German Marshall Fund partnership is an extremely valuable opportunity. First, it gives us access to experience and tools that will help us more effectively build a resilient, innovative, and European-oriented community. Second, it opens new ways in building partnerships with other cities, which enables us to learn from each other and realizing joint projects.
Ми переконані, що в цьому партнерстві Коростень також може бути корисним. Ми можемо ділитися досвідом адаптації системи самоврядування в таких умовах, які ми сьогодні переживаємо, працювати в пілотних проєктах, які ми теж сьогодні освоюємо, бути надзвичайно хорошим майданчиком для інших у післявоєнному відновленні, на які ми розраховуємо.
Corostin is a community that doesn't intimidated by challenges. We are finding new possibilities in this for our better future. We are ready to work on meaningful transformation in areas such as public governance, infrastructure modernization, social protection, and development of a democratic society. We are convinced that Corostin can also contribute significantly to this partnership. We are ready to share our experience in adapting local governance systems to crisis conditions, take part in pilot projects, and serve as a reliable testing ground for post-war innovation and recovery.
Ми впевнені в майбутньому і цінуємо зусилля тих, хто сьогодні стоїть поруч з Україною. Дякуємо німецькому фонду Маршалла США за довіру і надіємося, чекаємо на спільну роботу.
We feel confident about the future and appreciate the efforts of those who stand with Ukraine today. Thank you to German Marshall Fund for your trust. We are looking forward to mutually beneficial cooperation. Thank you.
Дякую.
If I could ask the speakers to join me on stage. The theme of today's sorry, can you? Yeah, okay. The theme of today's event is how Ukraine can improve its institutional capacity to ensure good governance of recovery efforts, and strengthening capacity and decision-making at the local level will be a key part of an effective recovery governance. And as we've heard from Mayor Moskalenko, municipalities are really at the forefront of not only delivering critical public services, but also planning and implementing the reconstruction. Since the 2014 decentralization reform in Ukraine, some authority and resources have been transferred to the local level, but under martial law, quite a bit of that has been rolled back, and many municipalities still face chronic underfunding and understaffing. And as a recent GMF report has shown, which we'll hear more about in the next panel, few municipalities have been involved in the development of the National Recovery Plan, and few also know much about it. So generally, there's not much knowledge of how this is laid out and how it will play out. Together with our esteemed panel, I want to spend the next 30 minutes exploring the context in which local governments are operating in Ukraine, looking specifically at three issues: how they can strengthen their position in the country's recovery governance system, strategies they're developing to build back greener and more long-term, and how they're working with business to accelerate their recovery. Our speakers are Vlad Rashkovan, alternate executive director at the IMF, representing Ukraine and 14 other states on the executive board; Justin Maury, government partnerships lead at the UK firm Building Design Partnerships; and Irina Stavchuk, interim director for the Central and Eastern Europe and Ukraine programs at the European Climate Foundation, And from 2020 to 2022, Irina was also Ukrainian Deputy Minister of Environmental Protection and Resources. Vlad, I want to start with you. You work very closely with the Ukrainian central government, but you're also a very proactive supporter of local recovery efforts. In fact, you have your own project to build a new city, and we can talk a little bit more about that later. But I want to ask you on your views about how local governments in Ukraine can strengthen their position within the broader governance and financing architecture of Ukraine's recovery.
Thanks, Anna. Thanks for inviting, and thanks for supporting the Ukrainian reconstruction. Actually, from the early days of the war, and you start thinking longer in the first days. And I remember our discussion on different venues, not only on cities, not only on regional development, but also in general. And I just came from another event where I said that we still need to borrow some of the ideas from German Marshall Fund after the Second World War, how to manage the longer-term reconstruction. But speaking about the regions and cities and municipalities, we need to admit that reconstruction is local. Reconstruction is not Kyiv. Even if Kyiv now, in the last months, became more heavily bombarded and attacked by Russians, the majority of reconstruction is in the regions. And if you look at the map, different maps, but one of them is World Bank Rapid Damage Needs Assessment, which shows the reconstruction needs going region by region. You see that majority of reconstruction will be southeast, definitely central, but tonight Lutsk was attacked, definitely, Western Ukraine is also not imminent from the war. But reconstruction is local, while the capacity is central. And this is one of the biggest problems which I see. And the government did a lot for keeping the economy floating after the war started, and we are in the war economy. But we really need to think longer on reconstruction. And I'm thankful, for people like Gabriel, and the European Union who are working on one of the most important reforms for me, which is the public investment management reform, and building up all the process of building single project pipeline, building strategic investment council. All of this is important. But let's be very frank, because while I said that reconstruction is local, the second element is reconstruction is people. We have a lot of good people, professional people, well-prepared people in Kyiv, maybe in a few big cities, but I'm very doubt that in Korostin, you have enough people, of the people who could speak the same language as IFC speaking, EBRD speaking, European Investment Bank, World Bank, the Sweat Fund, Fin Fund, etc. And Korostin is 60,000 people city, and the reconstruction is needed even for smaller cities. So that's why you need to have first, people. And my first advice would be to the small municipalities. You really need to find people. You need to also to fight for these people. You need to compete for the people, and you need to build up the teams. One of the elements of this PIM reform is building up the so-named project preparation facility, project preparation units, which should facilitate and catalyze the ideas, which could be local, and make from them more or less bankable projects, which later, under the Pillar 2, for example, European Union could finance, but not only, EBRD, EIB, others, and maybe private funds could finance. And we have now some sort of, sorry for this, like a adverse selection, because good people in Kyiv, they will invent some ideas. Reconstruction is in regions and cities, and we have the good projects will come from Kyiv, while the needs are in the local. So you really need to have people in the regions. The second thing is you need to build up the knowledge and quality and the professionalism and of these people. You need to, and this is my call to the international partners, European Union, but also others. World Bank is doing, US government is doing this, Canada, France doing this, but we need to do it a little bit more coordinated way, more systemic way, in order to prepare, to train these people. And we discussed with Gabriel many times before that we need to have like a certified teams on the level of the city, 10, 15 people, which could have, 40 different certificates how to manage the projects, how to tap the European money, how to run financial management, etc. Because without that, garbage in, garbage out. PIM reform, which is very, very helpful and which will be very much important not only for reconstruction but also for European Union accession. This will be a very important source of the structural funds. If we will not train people in the regions to do this, if we not prepare people in the regions, this will be very, very difficult. Again, maybe a few more elements. You mentioned, and thanks a lot for your project, and that you selected the cities, and I'm sure you will do it, but you selected only one city now while reconstruction is going in more cities. What I strongly believe that cities, in order to leverage, they need to catalogize their experience. Some sort of, they need to not only doing things, but also documenting what they're doing. Because this process of brainstorming, the process of building up the consensus on the level of the Gramada, speaking with donors, you need to put these on paper. What I know so far, Mariupol tried to do it, but Mariupol is not under recovery. It's more like a philosophical thinking. They did definitely start it. I advised them to do it a few years ago, and they published even several books about the process, how they went through this. So I would strongly recommend the cities to do it further. And the one element which I was also advising to other people, to other cities, and I spoke several times to the Association of Cities, is you really need to leverage on the twin cities or sister cities concept. Ukraine is still, sorry for using this word, hot on agenda of the global politicians. A lot of people have an empathy to Ukraine. A lot of cities have empathy to Ukraine. So if the cities have sister, towns or twin cities, and I believe there is some sort of projects behind that, I would strongly advise to use it. But what I heard that thousands of Ukrainian cities don't have any twin cities in anywhere in the world, for 1,000 towns. So I would definitely call for some projects which would do this, because this is a sharing of experience, sharing of support, etc. And I will focus a little bit later other things. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. That was a very good overview of some of the key issues at stake. And knowledge sharing is a very important part and will be central to the Ukraine Cities Partnership as well. We all know that if Ukraine wants to become an EU member state, it will have to rebuild according to European standards, including environmental standards, also energy efficiency standards. And many Ukrainian cities are already aspiring to rebuild according to these sustainability criteria because they see that, for example, transitioning to locally sourced renewable energy also makes them more resilient. But there are many challenges involved in that, and a lack of capacity is one of them. Irina, the European Climate Foundation was actually the first funder to support our work on green rebuilding in Ukraine, and we're still very grateful for that seed funding. But since then, ECF has supported many other projects on this issue. And you've also helped build an ecosystem of Ukrainian and international civil society organizations, NGOs working on this topic. From your experience of working with these NGOs and also with municipalities, which strategies are proving most effective in terms of helping municipalities build up local capacity to build back greener?
Yeah, now it's working. Good morning, everybody, and thank you very much for being able to share our experiences. I would say that municipalities in Ukraine really operate in very multi-crisis dimensional kind of situation. They really like people, capable people, they like finance, they like investments, because in the war investments don't come. So basically all of the municipalities with whom our partners and many others cooperate, they are so much eager to get cooperation, to get support, and to get involved with kind of other actors that could help them. So as many initiatives are there as possible, the better. And I'm very happy that German Marshall Fund also initiates its program for the cities. I would focus on several tactics that we in our work found very practical. So the first one is that learning by doing is much better than just learning. And it's not enough just to provide webinars or online courses to people which are already overwhelmed. It's much more useful if the projects are designed in a way that you are there together with local community, you become second, third pair of hands to look into the issues, to look into details, and to find together solutions. One of our partners, Eco Club Rivne, from 2022, they are working with local communities to help them develop and implement first renewable energy projects at critical infrastructure. And what we learned in these 3 years is that when municipality is helped to go through the whole process from beginning to the end, then they start planning the second and third and other projects on their own, because they already know what it means. And that's how the change happens. Or another example, and Sasha is here in the room, organization Urban Reform that comes to cities. It's a group of architects and social changers that bring together not only kind of architectural vision, but they bring together people, they bring together local businesses, and they try to find the points of development and to bring life and new ideas and new visions for the cities. So I'm also happy that German Marshall Fund is kind of planning to work closely with cities and help them to bring the cases. The second dimension that's also kind of important is aimed at systematic change in all the capacity building programs. On one side, there are many projects and many initiatives which include kind of trainings and capacity building. On the other side, if we look at our kind of official educational system, we still don't have in many universities courses at all, which would actually address the needs on the sustainable city development. And we also have the same problem kind of for the education for adults. If municipality, I don't know, architects want to get a course and know what are the modern concepts, there are no such courses. If a municipality wants to develop a cycling plan, you have one consultant maybe in Ukraine and no course in university how to do it. So including whatever capacity programs, quality that you can support in Ukraine, it's important to kind of match together with systematic educational programs to have the change which would be there for many years, and also include local businesses to make sure that the programs which are designed actually reflect the real needs. And one of the successful examples that I'm very proud of, it's cycling organization. It's basically an NGO that promotes cycling, but they brought together National Transport University. They designed together the program. We could help to finance the work of the consultant, and this consultant worked with students in a very practical work for 2 municipalities to design cycling infrastructures in these communities. And all of that brings together kind of the change. Another example, organization Repower, that is working on skills for renewable energy development in Ukraine, because the needs are there, the projects are successful, so they bring together again local business, educational institution, and local job center, so that this job center could provide the certified course to veterans and IDPs. And if we just focus on, like if we don't include the systematic changes, then the capacity after the international projects are over would not be there. I think I should stop here, right? For the
That was perfect, and lots of examples to look up and chew on. Thank you for that, Irina. Some municipalities are also turning to the private sector to address some of their capacity gaps and accelerate recovery planning. Justin, I want to turn to you. BDP has worked quite closely with Lviv and other municipalities. Could you share a little bit about your experience of working with a city like Lviv and what successful public-private collaboration can look like in a recovery context?
Thank you, and a pleasure to be here today. At BDP, one of the fundamentals of our design ethos is around the good city, the idea of designing for peoples, places, and especially for the citizens. So I think I'll probably try and cover 5 key points. I'll try to do that reasonably quickly. It's about establishing a joint vision and governance quite early on. Can you hear me? Is everyone okay? Yes? Okay, good. So establishing part of that is a good city steering group. So I think the most success we had engaging Lviv was when we were there in person. We had all the key people from the key departments there. I think beyond that, though, is that in a good steering group would include universities, key representatives from the local community. But beyond that, in our work in Indonesia, we found in particular having representatives from central government was also quite important. If not every meeting, but at least in terms of quarterlies or otherwise, to make sure there was a connection between the municipal and the central government. co-develop a recovery master plan, very similar to what we are talking about today. Developing a master plan that looks across all sectors, critical infrastructure, but also considers, a bit like the work that we're doing with Lemonkoy in Ukraine, is the short, medium, and long-term vision or goals that can be achieved. Embedding transparent decision-making and KPIs, so decision-making that is effective, so DREAM, if you will, but for the local community in Corazon, and then how that can be applied and engaged with them throughout the process. That's also very important, capacity building, but also that blended finance, touching on earlier about engaging with the financial institutes. So leveraging experiences we have, could be thought leadership, that we have about testing small pilot projects, the idea that you don't have to achieve everything at once. It can be done incrementally through strategic investment and small projects that lead to further investment. Scoping studies, like we do for UK government, identifying potential land with the community. And this is especially important because then it gives Corazon leverage in terms of their engagement. They have a potential to be part of a public-private partnership or otherwise. And then that then allows them to blend their budgets with IFIs or otherwise. And then through this, also building on the very good points about capacity building, is also good city training labs. So the idea is that, like some of the work we did around hydro dams in Indonesia was actually helping them to build digital twins. So this is twins in the virtual environment. But we didn't just do that, we trained them how to use the software in terms of Revit. So they can go on to manage themselves and do it more. And beyond that, community engagement, essential, fundamental. The success of our projects has always been through engaging the communities. This can be pop-up urban studios, many examples here, but also we can help support as consultants good quality engagement materials. As we know, be able to have that right vision idea to hook people in, to make them part of the process, but also that people engage in different ways. Some people will do so remotely, they don't like to be there in person. Others want to have it in front of them, to speak to them in person. So it's what are the right materials to support them. And then through that, also nominating local recovery ambassadors. Personal experience, if you don't find the right people to speak to, they can either be helpful or obstructive. So being able to engage with the right people as part of that process is essential. But also is that this is an adaptive plan. I think the way that UK has been successful, and perhaps others have not, is that it's fundamentally understood that the plan cannot be fixed. You need to build in policies and processes that allow you to adapt the plan to respond as things change and move forwards. And I think also part of that is tracking the performance. As mentioned, if you've established the KPIs clearly at the outset, a part of the process, then you bring in together the best of the international expertise and local knowledge can be truly achieved. And then finally, and this is a key one for us in many ways, is that our approach with the models we're doing with UK government, Japan government, other nations, and we're hoping to do through Lviv and now with Corazon, is to effectively apply the GMF and good city principles to establish case studies, if you will, lessons that can be transplanted around Ukraine as a good city recovery toolkit.
Great, thank you. And I love the idea of recovery ambassadors, something I haven't heard yet. Once the EU recovery funds will start being dispersed at a larger scale, cities in Ukraine will be competing for funding. And many, especially the smaller ones, don't have the capacity to access these funds and then also to absorb the funding. With projects like UCP, we plan to help some of the smaller communities, but we also need more systemic solutions. Vlad, I want to bring you back in to talk a little bit more about the conditions and reforms that we need to help municipalities access and absorb funding. And I know you're working on your new city project, and I'm sure that as you're doing that, you're thinking a lot about these questions. So maybe you can also draw on that for some examples.
Yeah, thanks. I would still go to where I started with PIM reform, public investment management. It's not done yet. Reform is not completed. It's just more or less, I would say, we're still on the pilot stage because we're learning. Minister of Economy, Minister of Development, international partners, European Commission are learning from that. The Parliament, so everybody, cabinet in general. So there is a lot of things to be done. There is there are some technological solutions around that, and we discussed about the capacity in the regions. And I agree that learning by doing is better than learning without doing, but much worse even doing without learning, you know, and because this is what we can. And therefore, the DREAM project is an important because it's a technological solution. It's like Prozora was in 10 years ago as a project. We need to learn how to use it because it has a potential, you know, for the regions and brings more like equality to different regions. But again, garbage in, garbage out there. The second thing, which I think the second big reform, which is important for the reconstruction, including on the regional level, is a midterm budgeting framework. During the war, we moved more, let's say, to short term. When Oksana Markarova was the Minister of Finance, she pushed under the IMF program, she pushed for the medium-term budgeting framework, which is like a 3-year planning rather than 1 year. And the majority of reconstruction projects, they are longer term. Therefore, we need to avoid that everybody in 20th of December is trying to capture all the remaining funds because on January 1st, they disappear. Because the projects will really go longer, and we need to move these across the years, and the people should not be, you know, in a hurry just in a few days and later relaxing after that. It still requires a lot of thinking because it requires longer-term thinking, while the war pushes you for a short-term thinking, you know, which is clear. Decentralization reform, you properly mentioned that. I personally believe that this was one of the biggest, best, and the most successful reforms since 2014. Unfortunately, during the war, during the COVID, and later during the war, it was a little bit backtracking. Again, understandably from one side, but I believe that decentralization is one of the factors which led to our success in resistance to the Russian aggression. You know, there is a joke, sorry for maybe not appropriate joke maybe, but you know that in which, do you know in which tank is the Russian general is sitting? You know, when there is a column of tanks, do you know in which tank is sitting? Is the question. In the second. You know why? Because it was Soviet protocol. Do you know in which tank the NATO general is sitting? He is not there. There is no need of the general in the tank when it goes, because it's a more or less, you know, you don't need to have a centralized system, someone who takes a decision, you know. So that's why, you know, decentralization reform is an important reform, and we need to continue that. And you properly mentioned also in the beginning about the funding. You know, we need to return back the revenues, you know, to the district, on the city level, because this is a big source of the both inspiration, you know, and the motivation for the mayors of good cities. You know, for sure you need to build the accountability framework against the bad mayors, but again, decentralization leads to more people trusting people who work with them. You know, I understand that the mayor Korostin is working from 1988. You know, which means that it's some kind of trust from people. You know, and you mentioned about the cities and the my city idea, because you know, I'm not, and I'm speaking not as IMF, but more as a Ukrainian intellectual. The idea is, I'm not discouraging reconstruction or recovery of cities, is for sure, but we have hundreds of cities which are leveled down, factually. So factually, it's a rebuilding of the cities, building new cities, you know. And unfortunately, a lot of the space on the southeast is mined and polluted with, you know, the outcomes of the war. Therefore, it's potentially, it's not easier, it's complicated. We do not have an experience of building new cities. The last city we have built, it was the Slavutish in 1985, 1988. And so we don't have this experience, but we need to try this. And the reform which we need to do it is a city building reform. You know, I understand that Parliament was focusing on some reform, but you know, it's a way where you need to combine the control, accountability with creativity of architects from one side, and the freedom of Hromadas, you know, to take decisions rather than controlling agencies to control what they're going to build. For sure, security is there. You know, we need to build these, and we have to learn from a lot of projects. You know, there are 70+ projects of building new cities in the last 20 years. Some of them have been implemented, some not. So I looked at the one project in the Netherlands, which has been started in 1989 and finished in 2010, and they managed to build two parts of the city. One is more like building the old type of the Dutch city, and another side is completely new, modern part, and it's working perfectly. The name of the city is Bradenwoord. So this is important. As a part of the city building, land reform should be completed. As a part of IMF and World Bank reforms, the land reform has been started, before the COVID, before the war started, and we need to complete it, because there are a lot of the instruments need to be done for, to give an access to the finances on the regional level. And you mentioned, we need to continue the green transition, because the cities, I came from a discussion, and the one person said we don't need to rebuild the inefficiencies of the past. So we need, if we already build something, let's go. I fully agree with European standards, and moreover, not only building European standards, let's be a role model for European cities, how we can do it. And I think we're capable to do it because we don't have any other choice. This existential risk for us and the existential challenge, and we have to do it. Nobody else will do it instead of us.
Thanks, Vlad. You, in a way, already sort of paved the way for my next question, namely the green rebuilding of cities. And there's a lot of talk now about conditionalities linked to EU funding, but also Ukrainian government funding. And Irina, I wonder whether you can share your views on how effective conditionalities are when it comes to supporting local efforts to rebuild, more climate friendly, more climate resilient, and what else is needed beyond conditionalities to enable green rebuilding at the local level?
Yeah, I would say that most of the kind of investment money that come to your facility in implementing in Ukraine, it's done through international financial institutions, and they do have their projects and criteria, and it's important to keep it in Ukraine even now, because that's kind of about taking smart decisions. But talking about general on the green reconstruction, we have like very high political narrative that supports the concept, but when it comes to kind of local level and sectoral decisions, it's not always reflected. And in many personal discussions, you would hear that, well, it's a war in Ukraine. We cannot focus on reducing of greenhouse gas emissions, and that is also understandable. But on the other side, we should also be pragmatic, because a lot of solutions that are there that actually support into Ukrainian energy security resilience, we should also have a long-term focus on phasing out dependence on fossil fuels. And by taking decisions today, we should take all of that into account, because it's also our future. It's also an aspect of Ukrainians who actually want to live in kind of to have better quality of life in cities, especially those who have lived abroad and who come back to Ukraine. They want to have better public transport. They want to have cities much better planned. They want to have buildings which are well maintained, that are energy efficient. They want to have nice public spaces where they can spend time and actually restore from all the crises that they have in life. So for municipalities, it becomes a challenge how to deliver on all of that without having the resources, and it's something that people expect. I would like to focus on some kind of gaps that I think, and some of the areas where I think have to be addressed. The first one is applying do not significant harm principle on the overall public investments in Ukraine, because it's not so much about kind of applying the latest modern technology to the way how we build the road. It's more about what kind of strategic decisions we take. Do we just need roads, or shall we also invest in rail, freight and public transportation? What kind of connections we need to have, as I said, less dependence on the fossil fuels in the future. It's also about energy decisions, which play a significant role in terms of what kind of recovery we will have, and that plays in itself extreme role in what kind of recovery we have. The second aspect that I would like to highlight, and Vlad already mentioned it, is implementation of European codes. In Ukraine, it's possible to design infrastructure by European codes, but it's also kind of in parallel we have the current norms and standards, which are adjusted Soviet standards, and they are very perspective. One of our partners, Vision Zero, they looked at the recent construction of bridges in Ukraine and they compared with European bridges of the same parameters. And what they learned is that Ukrainian bridges, so they looked at it from the perspective of the embedded carbon and resources. And the result is that Ukrainian bridges indeed consume much more steel and carbon, and that's related to the norms because they are not constructed on European codes, they're constructed on these adjusted norms. And moreover, the cost of these bridges is at least 50% more than the similar bridges in European Union. So helping Ukraine to kind of build capacity for authorities that kind of design tenders, for companies that design projects, and actually like maybe not to start from the next year, everything is Euro codes, but we should already now start kind of developing this project, so when Ukraine actually takes the political decision, everybody is prepared for that, because in certain cases it really helps to have more infrastructure and kind of meet more needs of the people and communities that we have. And kind of the last one on finance, it's been kind of raised a lot. We looked very focused just like on some finance issues. There are good initiatives with renewable energy and critical infrastructure. And for municipalities, it saves money, it provides resilience, and it's extremely important for Ukrainians to also understand that they have energy in critical moments. But you still have in small municipalities and for small projects like two extremes. On one side, humanitarian organizations that provide you equipment for free. On the other side, kind of unmanageable high interest loans that you cannot take, or ESCO companies that also kind of provide very high conditions. And there is hardly anything in between. And it's already 3 years, and it's been discussed at so many forums, and we are still not there to find the good solutions, how we can use, I don't know, the existing state programs that we have, 579 or other funds, that actually enable multiplication and scaling up of those solutions that economically feasible, provide resilience, energy security, and also kind of contribute to green reconstruction. There are more of such examples, so like focusing and trying to find solutions and find maybe creative ways which are just not possible to apply whatever we already have would be extremely useful.
Thank you. You already touched on the large amount of private sector investment that will be needed to rebuild Ukraine, and it's also been mentioned earlier this morning. Justin, I want to finish with you with a question on what firms like BDP can do to help attract investments to cities, and by that way also help attract talent to cities as well, supporting really long-term recovery and planning and also economic growth.
Thank you. Good question, and I think in a way builds on discussion points just raised. So our study in Lviv was actually about how do we engage with the city, capitalize on the fact that they're exploring how to bring in European standard gauge railway from Europe into Ukraine to Lviv, so it will become a gateway to the rest of Europe, and then transition into the Ukrainian railways. This is opportunity for transit-orientated development, regeneration that can be more sustainable, greener, and more engaging. But what Lviv has done quite well is they have quite a clear city brand. The mayor was very direct with us. I want 1 to 5 quick wins, easy projects that we can deliver, and stepping stones beyond that. But what they really also wanted was a roadmap. So what are the steps that could be taken then to deliver that and encourage the private investment? And I'd heard as much as 80% of Ukraine's investment was through private investment prior to the conflict. Therefore, how do we encourage that again? So that's what we started to explore. So in Kodosin, we might look at how we can capitalize on that shared experience, but also help them to develop a narrative, a compelling city brand, working with economists, brand specialists to develop something that is specifically to Kodosin. Part of our work in Ireland during COVID was how to help bring people back in. The cities were dying. So we came up with a series of projects for public spaces, small interventions that had a great impact. Design a Kodosin investment prospectus. So the idea being, how do you then provide that brand material that can be sent out to engage with people? And again, Lviv has done that quite well. But it's about showcasing wins, but also highlighting those projects. So brand events, they do, I was recently at Lviv Urban Forum, they do it every year. They do many events that sort of talk about who they are not just as Ukrainians, but also as the people of Lviv. Package investment-ready projects. I mean, that's the core of what we're looking at with GMF as well, but it's quick wins with clear revenue streams that follow afterwards. So that requires engagement with the funders, the financiers, so that we can understand how to structure those public-private partnerships. It's capitalising the land that the city already has, where possible, because that might be able to generate revenue for them or even be the starting point for development. And then through that, establish an investment facility office. I think they've invested in Lviv, but one of the greatest examples I saw was maybe in Medellin in Colombia, where they had the universities, they had the municipality, and they had the businesses all involved. That includes the banks and other key influential people to understand how they can collaborate to make the most for the city. But then through that, then leverages blended finance that could be international or local or otherwise. And the last part is really about strengthening that local talent ecosystem. You know, good city innovation hubs. Can you refurbish your municipality buildings? Can you have space there to invite your co-working into that environment? Can you have local businesses, pop-ups using your space, having direct engagement to try and build upon that? Partnering with regional universities, it's come up many times and can be very successful. I think there's even a local seminary college in Corosin. And then beyond that is actually developing an attractive place for people to be. I think many of our projects for key estates around the world is making it more attractive for people to be there, to have the hubs where people can communicate and engage. So that means housing, it means quality spaces, and then through that, a range of affordabilities within that to hopefully promote a Korosten diaspora reconnect. You know, can we bring back all those highly talented people from around the world back to Ukraine and make the most of it?
Thanks.
Thank you.
We have about 5 minutes left, and I want to give our speakers the chance for some final remarks and then open it up to the audience for questions.
Yeah, maybe one small remark is, first I want to say that I start liking this week in Rome because I found out something new today for me, and I'm a little bit surprised about bridges, and I would love to read the report because this is exactly what I would love to see. And I'm a little bit tired. Let's create our Ukrainian standards because we are the best ones. You know, we need to take these without the big of overthinking. If there is already standards working, let's use them. You know, if we go to Europe, let's use them. We will have to do it anyway. But bridges is also an important metaphor, and I just wanted to leverage what you said about the principles. You know, I remember when we worked on the first or second Commercial Fund reform report on Ukrainian reconstruction, and I spoke with Thomas Kleine-Bankhoff on the bridges, and I came in February 23 to European, and I saw a picture which I made, and I was proposing to put it on the cover page of the report. This was a picture of 3 bridges together. So there was a European bridge which was destroyed. There was in nearby Ukrainians, immediately did a temporary, move from European to Kiev. And in parallel nearby, there was building the 3rd bridge already more, sustainable, and it has been completed, And I said, this is a strong visual of how Ukraine living at the same time, working both being wounded under the war, finding the short-term solutions and thinking about reconstruction. And so people say, oh yes, it's good. I say, but when you look at this bridge, has 0 lifts or escalators for inclusiveness. It has been built according to the old standards, and I'm sure, with a cost much higher. I will mention other element, but because of the standards, there was no electricity around that. I'm not speaking about the new electricity. I'm not mentioning that this bridge is not prepared for the future of the self-driving cars for sure. Not many people, when I say about this, people start smiling. Guys, we build infrastructure. This is for decades. And the people working now, we need to put their sensors, we need to prepare these there. So therefore, there was there was one NGO leader in Ukraine who said the principles, they should be not only written, they need to be implemented, and we need to live from these, and you mentioned these. So I really hope that in your project you will do this. Thanks.
Yeah, maybe bring something that I wanted to bring, but thought I don't have time in the beginning. It's about importance of investment in human capital in Ukraine. Ukrainians have been doing amazing these 3.5 years, and but there's human beings, and it's extremely challenging. And like all the initiatives which support people, not only in terms of the kind of technical skills and knowledge, but also empowering them, kind of building up leadership, giving them kind of opportunity and enable them to act and to implement the dreams and plans that they want to do for Ukraine. That's all extremely important. And just also to kind of refer to one of the examples, there is a Czech initiative that brings local actors and leaders to Czech Republic for study tours. It's like 1 week study trip. And in this 1 week, they kind of work with them on this empowerment of leadership, but also kind of share with them the way the Czech Republic went through the Soviet Union to democracy. And that's kind of the vision that Ukraine also now needs, kind of to get this empowerment for local people, to get the power to move on and to reconstruct Ukraine. And these 200 alumni, local leaders, they already plan and dream to have their own small funds foundation. So they want to be owners and they want to kind of be enabled to manage on its own. And I also think that such initiatives where you get kind of people who dream to have kind of the plans and being able to help them to implement it, that also something that kind of builds into capacity into the future and into the transformation of Ukraine.
Justin.
Thank you. I kind of build on the bridges discussion. I think I quite like that. I recently contributed to a white paper which was forwarded by Yulia Sirenenko, which was called Bridges to Ukraine. And this was quite a positive one for us, where it was a really grassroots approach about engaging with citizens, SMEs, about how to almost not just so much knowledge share, but to transfer IP, fundamental skills and knowledge, so as to help create ways in which Ukrainians can develop their own tools. They can develop their own way forward. So it's not to dictate, but to engage with, and now, that sharing of knowledge. And there's some incredible things that the Ukrainians are already doing. So I think it is a mutual transfer of knowledge as often as not. But I think this is a really good one to finish on, actually, building the bridges and the steps forwards to the future. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'm seeing the clock jump backwards, so we have a bit more time. We have around 5 minutes. So I want to take some questions from the audience. Here in the first row, and then 2 more.
Hello to everybody. Dmitry Sakharuk. I work for a big energy company, DTEC. Our 50,000 people, our employees, every day keep the light on during the last 4 years. So I just listening to the first and the second panel, and I thought that probably the only thing that kind of is common for all discussions in many forms is about energy. And the Marshall Plan, initial Marshall Plan, was a lot devoted to the investment into power plants and distribution network that time, many years ago, 70 years ago. And I think that we also should think about how to accommodate this need in the current world. And I guess just as a contribution to the discussion, would like to share that basically, usually we thought that energy should be affordable and reliable. Basically price, and always when you switch on the light, it's on. But these days, we also see that it should be resilient. And we have a unique combination, which is, I think, a kind of a gift of God, that resilient, in our case, means renewable. Because what we noticed that...
Can I ask you to keep it to a question?
Yeah, it's not a question, it's just a contribution that basically when we say resilient and when you say renewable, in our case it's basically solar, wind and batteries that we are right now in Ukraine are building. And that will help all of us build the light bridges that Vlad mentioned, to schools, municipalities. And I think that if we kind of focus our initiatives in the plan, that will definitely contribute to all of us, and our energy will be always there when we need it. Just as a thought about the angle that we should also keep in mind.
Thank you. And the lady in the back with the white shirt.
Good afternoon. My name is Mikhailina Skorek-Shkrivskaya. I'm from Irpin, from NGO Smeliva Irpin. So let me add a little bit about the bridge. Because on URC in Rome, we will present complex reconstruction of that area as a public space, as memorialization space, and also as a hub about memorialization and work with war crimes built in Romanivka village. And we have a special city council on inclusiveness created in April this year, and we work very carefully in that case. But at the same time, Irpin was very destroyed. Like more than 50% buildings were seriously damaged, and 40 apartment buildings were completely demolished. And the problem is when we will rebuild those buildings and whether we will rebuild according to the new standards. Because as NGO Smeliva Irpin, we are doing monitoring on complex reconstruction. We monitored more than 50 buildings like schools, kindergartens, and houses, apartment houses and private complex reconstruction, and we see that really inclusiveness is very important for our community, but they were not involved in early reconstruction projects. So I agree with you that that's the challenge, but about the bridge, I believe that problem will be solved when we will implement the biggest project presented, I think, day after tomorrow on URC.
Shall we rebuild that bridge?
Not the bridge, but the public space around, because inclusiveness, that's not only about lifts, that's about bicycle routes and other good initiatives provided.
I'm sorry, we're running out of time.
Okay,
I'll have to cut you short.
By
Sorry.
public, that was very participative discussion, and I'd like to correct a little bit that participation in the European community is very strong, and civil society's voice is very loud there. Thank you.
Thank you. And one last question, and please keep it short, just a question.
Yeah, good morning, everybody. I'm Vasil Babach from Kyiv, Ukraine, representing Easy Business think tank. It was a wonderful panel about recovery, but as I'm working mostly with EU accession, I want each of the speakers to connect it a bit with EU accession. Is there any one recipe, either for the government or the private sector or for think tank civil society you would like to share how to make it sustainable recovery plus EU accession? Sometimes it's very costly, sometimes not. Your ideas, your recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you. So we're out of time, so I will ask you to keep your answers to just 1 minute, and I let you pick from the questions.
First of what Dmitro said, if we will do during the reconstruction only one thing, changing the energy system of Ukraine from centralized to decentralized renewable, this will be already the biggest element of what we can do for the future generations of Ukraine. This is about resilience, this is about efficiency, this is about many, many, many things. Speaking about Irpin, it's good, and I'm really happy with that. The bridge has been built, and it would be better to doing and learning by doing. And definitely we need to ensure that the future bridges will be built, will already take the voice of the civil society before, and also the monitoring of the civil society. Speaking about European Union, we discussed when we were going here that we became now victims of World Bank rapid damage need assessment, which speak about $500 billion needed for Ukrainian reconstruction. I believe we have only this figure, but I think it's a wrong figure, because the reconstruction is a function not of the damages, it's a function of the vision. And the vision as of today, we have only one, is European Union. And therefore, whatever we can do in order to become closer in standards, processes, not closer, but adopting, this is what we can do on each level, both on the municipal level, on the government level, financial sector level, Yes, we have our peculiarities, but we need to go to Europe.
Thank you, Vlad. And Irina, a minute, please.
Yeah, I'll probably take the one on European integration. I also very much agree on renewables and the bridge. So I have 2 points. One is that we have to be very pragmatic and priority-oriented in terms of how to sequence European integration. And when we talk about kind of green reconstruction and transport, we should start with those areas that can impact here and now, so the standards for infrastructure, the kind of elements that probably kind of more beneficial for business or create problems for them. And then we should kind of take it on a longer term issues that probably as of now are not that priority and could be kind of planned a bit later. I also wanted to kind of have make a message. I've been working in the Ministry of Environment, and I think that we should transform the approach how the packages of the legislation are prepared, and the ministries should have certain budgets that they can kind of outsource to legal companies, and that's not happening in Ukraine. So everything has to be done inside, or with the technical assistance, or with kind of support of civil society organizations, which are not always kind of legal experts. And if we want to make it fast, if we want to make it more effective, we have to find mechanisms on the government level, how the ministries can work with professional legal organizations, with whatever steering committees that would decide on the tenders and everything, but that would really speed up the process. If we don't make it institutionally within the ministries, I don't see how we run so fast on so many files.
Those ones are hard to follow. I would say in many ways, I second all the points raised in many ways. I think it is about understanding, planning and processing, so you have the appropriate steps in place. It's making it achievable and deliverable. I think often the biggest challenges in many areas is that it's not affordable. It's trying to build something that you don't need yet. It's better to find what's appropriate to the scale and place. But also building capacity, yes, but for your future. So you're starting with your youth, your children, your community groups, to start the education at the lowest levels and then bring it upwards, so that as and when you do achieve that European session, that you've already got the training and that knowledge in place to fully engage with it and capitalize on those new and strengthened relationships.
Okay, thank you. And a big applause to our panel, please. I've been told we are moving straight into the next panel, so no coffee break for you. Sorry about that.
Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. We are beginning the next panel.
You're just going to have to start and then I'll...
Yeah. Hello, everyone. Unless you heard from Alexandria, there's no break. So please be seated. Yeah. Alexandria, I need her help.
Can you get everyone to sit, please? I think if you come up and start talking, people are going to... I'm not going to... Okay, let's just start talking.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are beginning the next panel. If I could please ask you to take your seats, that would be most grateful. Thank you.
Okay, so last chance. Whoever wants to escape, now is your chance. 3, 2, 1. It's going to be a dancing chair competition. Whoever is not seated, we're going to take out the chairs. Okay? Okay, especially the panelists should be there. Sorry for the military rundown, but as the conversations get so incredibly interesting and rewarding, we are also having to make adjustments to the scheduling. I told you there's a military person in the room, and that's Alexandria. Let's give it up for the wonderful organization. Thank you so much. Okay, so many of you have already made up your mind that GMF is an extraordinarily multifaceted organization, and we are so privileged and humbled to be partners with the many heroes of Ukraine and Ukraine's partners in all of our events, policy, groundmaking, cities to cities programming, an incredible array of programs that we support and implement. My name is Clara Vorintiru. I am the regional director of the Black Sea office, and I had the privilege of working with and for Ukraine as well as the broader region. And what I can tell you over the past years is that out of the entire geography that GMF has been working on in its existence, there's no one country as incredibly inspiring as Ukraine is, which is truly a phoenix bird. At every event or work or program we do, we have to look back to the struggles and sacrifices that have been taking place, in this case just last night, and then we start engaging with our partners and stakeholders in incredible conversations about the future. And I think that Phoenix Bird effect stands very strongly even 3 years after the war. And again, personally, I would like to thank all of our partners and donors in this respect. Secondly, I think there is an important element of continuity to today's event. We saw in the first panel top-down approach, the central level engagement, the incredibly efficient work that the Ukrainian authorities are putting forward in the reconstruction process. And then we saw in the second panel the ground-up effort, the way cities are really stepping up to the challenge, provide societal resilience in Ukraine, and really make sure that communities on the ground stay strong and firm and with fantastic ideas coming up. And now the third panel, which I know we're all tired of hearing, but it's gonna be very rewarding because it links the two together. And I would like you to think through a very mouth-heavy word, which is synaptic connections. We're not medical doctors, but synaptic connections are what make a person more or less intelligent. The more connections there are, the more our brain functions better. The more stakeholder engagement there is between the different stakeholders in Ukraine and abroad, whether local actors, private sector actors, central government, international donors, the more effective the process will be. And I want to put forward this idea of synaptic connections to challenge the more traditional approach of a trade-off. You can't have efficiency if you, quote unquote, waste your time with dialogue and representation, stakeholder structure, dialogue, and so on. But it's not just a question of legitimacy. It is legitimate to have all voices heard. It is advisable to have private sector actors, local actors, civic actors shoulder the challenge of the reconstruction and survival of the democratic ethos in Ukraine, but it is also effective. And on that note, I would like to pass the floor to our wonderful panel, and many thanks for your contributions. Just one recent report we put forward from our collective efforts in GMF is local stakeholders' role in Ukraine's resilience and how these synaptic connections between stakeholders really advance the reconstruction process in Ukraine. And on a final metaphoric note, I would just like to highlight the fact that one of the pictures on the cover was incidentally made at the university that my co-author has graduated, Valery Kravets. And I think this is a beautiful example of how people from Ukraine, for Ukraine, share with us the ideas of how to move forward. Many thanks.
Thank you, Clara. My name is Nona Michelidze. I'm senior fellow at the Institute of Affari Internazionali. I deal with the Eastern Europe and EU enlargement process in Russia here at the Institute. It is my privilege today to moderate this last panel, which Clara anticipated. It already somehow will try to connect the dots of what has been discussed so far in this morning, meaning that we will try to cover really local, domestic, governmental, and then international dimension of this process called recovery, which is unfolding in a very dramatic context of war and in continuously evolving geopolitical dynamic. We are speaking about the multi-stakeholder involvement in the process of recovery, where I think that the word inclusiveness is the most important one. But I think that the most important thing is to look at the process from the bottom-up approach and to think first of all, of one of the most important actors in this process, which should and is supposed to be a civil society. And with this, I wanted to start with our first speaker, Stephanie Schiffer, founder and director of the European Exchange based in Berlin. And I wanted to ask you, when thinking about the civil society, we think, of course, in broader understanding of this world. It does not include only the NGOs, it includes grassroots movements, it includes marginalized groups, it includes ethnic minorities, even IDPs in Ukraine. So how we do ensure that all these groups we can really involve in what is called the recovery process of Ukraine, that their voices are being heard in this process.
Hello, now it's switch on, yeah. Yeah, thank you very much for the question, and thank you so much for the invitation to talk here. It's a honor to be here. And I am representing the European Exchange, as you mentioned, and also Kiev Dialogue, which is a platform for cooperation between German and Ukrainian civil society. We have been working since 2014 until 2022 to the full-scale invasion in communities, with smaller communities in Ukraine, in 40 small cities, around 50,000 inhabitants. So our main partner in Ukraine is the Renaissance Foundation, and I'm happy to see the partners here, the colleagues, the directors from the Renaissance Foundation. So what we learned in this work was how impactful the cooperation can be between civil society and local authorities and the local government if there is a space and a room for maneuver and resources in these 8 years. And the framework for this work was the decentralization reform, which was going on that time. And it's not news, it's a fact that the decentralization reform will continue, and also the ULEAD program will continue. This is very important in these times where the martial law has to centralize certain governance actions. It is for us important to see that how prominent the local dimension is discussed here. In this discussion today, Ms. Maternova started with it, and it was mentioned almost on all panels before. So the local dimension is where the resilience is for a country and where democracy is. And I must say, I think it was a true but also a sad constatation we heard on the last panel from Mr. Rashkovan, who said that reconstruction is local, but capacity is central. I think this is a situation which should not be so in the third year of reconstruction and of ongoing war. So we all know that in the Ukraine facility and in the Ukraine plan, there is an obligation to include the local level into the recovery and the reconstruction process. This is a legal obligation. And if in the third year of the full-scale invasion and of a reconstruction process, we have to see that still the capacities and the resources are centralized and not localized, we see there is a need for action. And so I would say in our discussions that we have with local communities, with the associations of self-governance which are in place and which are working, we see that they are not fully involved in the reconstruction, in the recovery process, and that the decision-taking processes are not in a form that would answer to this legal obligation that we have both in the Ukraine facility and in the Ukraine plan. So I would conclude by also your question, how can the role of civil society be? The role of civil society will definitely be strengthened if there will be a meaningful and impactful inclusion of a local level into the decision-taking process of the reconstruction and the recovery. And not only of the decision-taking process, but also in the allocation of funds of the Ukraine facility to the local level. I think that's an obligation we all have to take and we all have to answer. We should not leave it up to the Ukrainian government to do that, but we should have a look into the structure and to have a common effort to implement these requirements which are already in place.
Thank you, Stephanie. Now I move to Professor Laszlo Bruce, Director of the Democracy Institute of the Central European University, and we move kind of the more international dimension of the recovery process about the multi-stakeholder involvement in Ukraine's recovery, wondering, looking at the picture and the process is still unfolding, what are the gaps right now that we identify in the process, what are the opportunities in order to make this multi-stakeholder involvement kind of the integral part in a long-term process which is called Ukraine's democratic and economic resilience.
First of all, thank you very much for the invitation and thanks for a very interesting workshop or side event. Let me start with that. In 5 minutes, it's very hard to answer your question, but the crux of my answer to your question, specific question, is that to create more meaningful ways of stakeholder involvement and one, the whole framework has to be changed. The whole framework has to be changed because it's not enough to say that civil society should be participating if the whole process in the end is centralized and doesn't take into account the longer-term political consequences of what's going on. And here we are, of course, at the German Marshall Fund event, and it's very important to remind us that the crucial, perhaps the most important element of the Marshall Plan was to create a framework in which politics and economic reconstruction were closely coupled. That's terribly important because this is missing from the debates. That is, the goal was very clear, make economic reconstruction in a way that can create a longer-term sustainable, broad-based support for democratic institutions and can compete with the geopolitical opponent that is Moscow. Since we talk a lot about the economics or the organizational or governance issues of the reconstruction, it's very important to bring in the politics, the political aspects of it. That is, until that coupling happens, it's very hard to create a meaningful space for things that you would like to see. Clara mentioned the synoptic connections. Of course, that's the most important perhaps thing, that if you would like to create a broad alliance around the new institutions, then you have to mobilize lots of information that is dispersed. It's not just Hayek who said that. but that's also a basic political issue. Yeah? And that's also the lesson of the previous wave of enlargement. That is, it is not by chance that 5 to 8 years after the previous wave was over, that the accession happened. In Europe, the new trends arrived in Poland and Hungary, illiberalism, economic nationalism, Euroscepticism, and all of that. That's not by chance. That was because of the neglect of the political aspects of accession and of reconstruction. So I have 3 more concrete things to say. How much? 3 minutes? Yeah. So the first thing is that it's very important to integrate the reconstruction, recovery issues with the implementation of the EU rules and European integration. It's terribly important because the big divide and the big inequalities are generated during the implementation of these reforms. How you implement the reforms might generate lots of winners, lots of very broad alliance for the European Union and for democratic institutions, or might create the social basis of illiberalism and Euroscepticism. That's the most important lesson of the last wave of enlargement. And that needs that at all levels, the political, longer-term political implications of whatever you do, economic recovery or implementation of the EU rules, has to be considered. At the highest level, this is the issue of how you govern the whole reconstruction and development plus the implementation. There are already proposals. Gerard Roland and Timofey Milovanov proposed a joint governance in which the EU and the Ukrainian political leadership shares the responsibility for these things, and that's very important. The details of that are still in need of working out, but that allows for more political responsibility on the Ukrainian, sharing the political responsibility between the Ukrainian and the EU for the longer-term political consequences of what happens. And that, of course, if that issue is taken into account, that means that you have to include business, labor, civil society, municipalities, and many diverse actors to make sure that you have the right information to get in sync the requirements of recovery and longer-term political basis. So the first thing is that is at top. There is a very important need for sharing the responsibility between Ukraine and the EU. The other question is within Ukraine. It's very important to have a common framework that is supported both by the government and the opposition. That's longer-term sustainability question of any kind of things that happens. And it's not about details, it's about the principles and general goals. If that's there, the sustainability is conditions. And the third thing about these details of broad coalition, that one can talk about that for hours, but so I try to limit myself to 2 minutes on this broad, what does it mean? First is, it's important to include business, and everywhere business is appearing, yes, and I think it's very important. But now, let me talk with my other hat as a political economist. It's very important not to see the unit of transformation, recovery, or reconstruction as the firm. It's never. That's the lesson of the previous way of enlargement. It's always value chains, sectors, because you might get wonderful things at the level of single firms, but that might, for example, marginalize firms that were linked in value chains or in backward or forward linkages. So it's very important to have a strategy in which inclusive even at the level of business. The other is unions, trade unions. That was the biggest mistake of the previous wave of enlargement, to leave out labor. Labor is extreme right, supporting in Poland, in Hungary, and many other countries, Eurosceptic forces. You can repeat that, Ukraine, there's no problem with that, but that would be waste. Unions might have to be reconstructed. They might need to be helped by the European trade union associations to upgrade them. But leaving them out is a recipe for longer term, creating basically support bases for illiberal forces. And then arrive to your question, to civil society. Civil society has to be included, but it's not about, it's not just inclusion, it's about capacity building. It's about empowering. The EU actually, up until 2002, did a lot for creating capacities for local actors to participate in developmental alliances. Not just about how to create projects or how to think about programs, developmental programs, but also by giving them capacity how to make effective voice and similar things. I actually did research on that, and that was very successful. Unfortunately, the EU dropped these inclusionary policies in 2002, changing basically the structural funds governance and giving all powers to the central governments. So, but in the last sentence, it's in general, I think it's not just in the case of civil society, but in general, creating integrative coalitions, at least in Ukraine, is about has also be linked to capacity building, not just the civil society, but the state. Someone mentioned here in the previous, in the first panel, that the people who make this longer-term plan, how much they earn, or how safe they work places. That's an anomaly that cannot be a basis for longer-term change. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now, last but not least, let's come to the governmental dimension of the recovery process. I'm pleased to introduce Natalia Vinarchuk, Senior Project Manager at the Reforms Delivery Office of the Cabinet of Ministers of Ukraine. And I wanted to address you with the kind of the three sets of questions because it is clear that the Ukrainian government has to act in extraordinary context. It has already to resist the military level to the aggression. So I was wondering what is the capability of the government to lead also the recovery process alongside resisting the war. Then that phrase reconstruction is local, capacity is central. I noted it as well. I was wondering how is the government leading to coordinate its recovery work with the local authorities, with the local realities, and the third dimension regards the EU. Because in the time of the war, Ukraine also advancing in the implementation of reforms of the EU, and recovery is connected also with the EU reforms. So how to keep this process going on the same binary of the development?
Yes, thank you. I think I received a very interesting and heavy package of questions here all in one, summarizing all the panels. And I actually want to start maybe with a lighter topic, connecting it to the Clara's remarks on synoptic connection. One of my first actually work assignments was to work with the communities on the local level, far before I started working on the central level or international level. And we were actually reconstructing one of the streets in my hometown in Lviv. And that was a very exciting experience for me, but what I took away from it is that the more stakeholders you engage, the more people are unhappy at the end. I don't know if that rings a bell with people that actually have some practice with working in the multi-stakeholder setting environment, but I think from that point in time, what I can say, this idea solidified moving through national and international level. So I think that should also, we need to keep it in mind, that multi-stakeholder dialogue and engagement does not necessarily mean that everybody's satisfied or happy, right? We just want to arrive at the most sustainable, balanced solution and include the interests of the groups that should be represented. So moving on to this package of questions, let's start from the first one. So I just need to make a remark. I'm not representing the government, but the idea of the project that I work for is actually to give support to the capacity of the government, and it was established post the revolution in 2016. And we understand that since then the task has basically become mammoth task. I think when you were asking me about the government capacity, right? I mean, you see probably from the faces of our ministers, deputy minister, and etc. I think it speaks 100 words, so I'm not going to address that. But for Ukraine, I think there's no separation really between the wartime and recovery time. It's all the reality. It's a reality check that the country is currently on. And I just wanted, I think today we didn't really mention enough like our forces, Ukrainian forces, because the part of a recovery is really written on the front lines. We are speaking of recovery as a one monolith, as if it's something that continuously flows from implementing it now into the process of post-war, right? But the thing is that we don't have that element of certainty when war is going to end. And we see, for obvious reasons, but we see that both assessments in the Ukraine plan, assumptions in Ukraine plan on when the war is going to, bless you, were actually projected for 2024, I think beginning 2025. The same for the IMF program in Ukraine. So baseline and negative scenarios, they both look at the 2025 and 26, and probably Vlad should have mentioned it. But we are currently in this box where we don't have a normal certainty, like in any other country, that would have to basically lift this task. So what do we can actually work on? I think very often what we hear speak about are really institutions and institutional capacity. And luckily also on academic side, we have approved that this is actually the determinant on the of the growth and long-term prosperity. I don't know if anybody's following the Nobel Prize winners, but gladly Asimoglu proved that, and I think that should not be doubted, and that's the additional force in support of democracy. Not to take it for granted, but really to focus on institutions. So I'm going to be saying institutions a lot because it's, I think, also an interesting fact that post the revolution of dignity, when EU was basically picking the reform, right, that would be this vehicle for Ukraine, so the discussions landed on the decentralization, but also the public administration reform was one of in the cards. And I think we're very lucky to have this great achievements for decentralization, despite COVID mentioned, despite war, because this was also one of the pillars of the Marshall Plan. And we here use Marshall Plan as a synonym for recovery for obvious reasons, I think because we're under auspices of GMF that kindly extended the invitation to me and other panelists, but we know that many other initiatives in the context of development were also branded Marshall Plan in Haiti and other countries, but they were far, far from successful. So I think what we can say already now is we are in the phase of learning, and before we start actually I understand there are a lot of problems, a lot of critique, but when we come to this golden triangle of partnership, right, between the government, civil society, and business, I think what we have to honestly say is that there has to be an honest reflection on learning, right, and the best practices. And throughout panels, we have really been hearing about that a lot, and I'm very pleased, and I think that's very refreshing based from the previous conversation on previous years around the ERC. Probably worth to mention that I was related to the organization of the ERC conferences in Lugano and London, and I think zooming out in this macro perspective, we can also say that we are currently in the 4th year, right? I mean, the full invasion began much before, like in 2014, but in this multilateral international dialogue, when all eyes are on Ukraine, we are on the 4th year. And if the first conference was understandably very optimistic, right, with the government coming up with a plan, for obvious reasons, further down the line, it had to be reassessed. I think the conference that followed up actually provided a certain reality check for international community, also what's going on in Ukraine, and then it's yet to be seen, right, what the conference in Rome is going to look like. But I have this strong sense that we are moving into the direction of actually understanding coordination as not a noun, but as an action, and talking about the results that we want to achieve. And I think inclusion, actually, of representatives of Ukrainian community from civil society, from business, is an additional testament to the fact that there are a lot of lessons learned. There are a lot of lessons learned from 2014. There are a lot of lessons learned from 2022. And yes, I think we need to be humble to take on the best practices when we're speaking about the sectoral standards and et cetera, or building anything that's going to advance us to the EU. But also at the same time, I would just want to call the international community also to be humble, because I think that's what is needed for a good dialogue, is the ability to listen and the ability to learn from one another. So that was a bit of a lyrical. Now coming back to the questions that you had on EU integration. I would not say anything else probably more than Gabriel already shared with us, but it's not just that there's an obligation to engage the local stakeholders. There are funds pinned to the local recovery in Ukraine. And I think local recovery is a bit of an oxymoron, right? Because in essence, all the projects are on the local level. We can have different mechanisms of funding them. They might not depend necessarily on the government. They might depend on the business logic behind them, on the financial flows and structures. But I think the bottom line in it is that we are coming back yet at the capacity level, because this is unprecedented a level of institutional capacity that would be needed to follow through on any plans for recovery. And I think that's a very important message, to have hope for everyone, to really have and work on the vision and the plan moving forward. And I think the important message here is also to work already now on the enabling environment. And there's nothing that works better to create that enabling environment as making some mistakes and learning already now. Because I think on these, we know the numbers, right? We know that the amount for the recovery needed for Ukraine now probably is close to 3 times more than our GDP. We know that our budget needs for covering our budget gap are not covered for the next year. We know that the government is facing actually many challenges, right? And the capacity is indeed quite strained here. But at the same time, I think what inspires me personally, that we have such a great group of people working on different levels to persevere and actually to work within the specific domains of recovery. Building the bridge to European integration, right? European integration is not, I mean, it's abstract for many people. It might mean different things to people sitting here in Ukraine, in different countries of the EU and outside EU. But I think the bottom line is it's really technical. I mean, you would probably be listening to our governance saying on the clusters integration, negotiation chapters, and etc. I think that logic also applies to any big task that you in general want to do, including on the recovery, because recovery is also sectoral, and any plan, like Ukraine plan, is based on the sectors. Any plan for the regional recovery would also have to understand, okay, what do we have now in the regions? Because it's impossible probably to recover in a sustainable way without having the evidence on the ground and without understanding what do we have available, which capacity we do have, which capacity we do lack, and where we can get those resources. So here, probably, I don't know how much time I have left, but I wanted to also note, I think a rather important thing that I agree with the statement that the right capacity is kind of central and the reconstruction is local. Alluding to the PIM reform that I think was mentioned in the good, in every panel, so keeping that tradition, just wanted to say is that this reform architecture, it's not only central. So it has indeed the state level pipeline, but it also has the regional pipelines and community level pipelines. And it also has institutions that had to be created, like local investment councils, to make those decisions. So it is a double challenge, right, to make sure that the new institutions can function properly, that the right set of actors are included into these negotiations at the local level, and both that there is an understanding that this is done in a smart way with respect to resources that are available. And I think I would just caution, maybe end up with few points for caution and maybe for optimism, right? What's best? I don't know if to end with optimism or to, yeah, I think with caution, right? Maybe here, just on the again, taking it on the donor level and donor level coordination, we understand increasingly that this rebuilding and resource for rebuilding would have to come from the EU. But we also have to have a way to tune in actors that are outside EU that want to help. I think especially Central Eastern Europe will be important in sharing their experiences. So I want to caution here against the situation when we say, oh, like the Ukraine's recovery is fully EU responsibility. Yes, like it's for us the survival strategy to become part of the EU, and I think there is a lot to say that we need to strive for industrial integration. This both in the interest of EU and Ukraine, and I think what we need also actors here in Europe to do is actually to promote and to give this evidence to their stakeholders in their countries to see it. I don't want to use that in the trade-off sense, but in the sense that it is a pragmatic step to take given where we are currently, and that we are, I would want to believe it, but we will still have Russia as our neighbor probably for some time. So now moving to the optimism, right? I think first is that the Ukrainian people, I would not narrow it down to civil society, right? Because it can be institutional, but we also have great voluntary initiatives on the ground, also rebuilding, collecting rubble. We have great business initiatives as well that are tuning in without visibility sometimes to really support also reconstruction efforts, because for them this is also their country to rebuild. So they're very invested in that as well, like I think any Ukrainian. So from that, what I want to say is that the hope is there, right? So in a way, it's hard to contrast it with the fact, so I'm not now living in Ukraine, but I know that what it means to check on your loved ones, like every time there is an attack from the Russian side. And unfortunately, we are also living in a time when the technology enables exponentially to increase the scale of those attacks. And we're talking here about recovery, and I just want to as a sign of optimism, to say that there are a lot of that the Ukrainian organization institutions are carrying on their shoulders. I think it's also fair to say that we want it to not be in vain. And I think that supporting Ukraine right now should be also more seen in ways as supporting freedom, democracy, but also supporting actually European Union as a strong institution on the international agenda. And I think we don't have time to dive into that very much, so I'm probably going to stop here and happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Natalia. Before maybe opening the floor to the questions from audience, I wanted to approach both Stephanie and Laszlo you with a question which regards what Natalia said before when she invited to hear and consider the local voices. And I was thinking about the challenge and how to overcome this challenge of international donors making the recovery process really local, meaning that keeping the ownership of Ukrainians and not ending up what could be kind of the West planning of the recovery process. So how keep this process running by Ukrainians and how help them to be resilient in this process, not to turn it kind of the top-down process which comes from the international donor, but which is really from bottom-up in the hands of Ukrainians.
If I may start answering your question and what Natalia said, I think including integrally and systematically the local level in Ukraine would be the very best answer to your question. This would mean this is local ownership, this is a bottom-up approach, this is strengthening local democracy, and this is what Russia wants to destroy, the local democracy. Democracy as such, but local democracy in specific. So strengthening the involvement of the local voices of the municipalities and of their associations, which give them a voice and which are in place. I think this would be the very best way how the West could, without West planning or anything, start such a process. And the lady from the World Bank, she mentioned how the cooperation among the ministries on the state level was organized successfully to have this common approach and this coordination, and that now it is the challenge and the time to unroll such a mechanism to down to the local level. And this is, I think, this is really the common challenge we have now, and this requires contribute, or let's say a separation of tasks from the ministries, from the international donors, from civil society, and from the local communities and the associations. And I think the local associations can learn from the ministry level how this cooperation could function. And I think what we all together should do very soon is to see how it can be legally enshrined. And here was mentioned the recovery law, which is to be developed. I think necessarily only the Ukraine facility and the Ukraine plan obviously are not enough to enshrine it legally, but there should be something, a place maybe in the recovery law where such a mechanism could be fixed. This is something we should think about. And I think then it will be not a competition, it will be not somehow West planning or how you called it, but then it could be really a common and a proper approach. And maybe last mentioning, it would be also benefit for the EU accession process, where the local levels plays a crucial role, and a strengthened local level will have important contribution to the EU accession.
I just can repeat what I said before, that or put it in your language, learning. I think the EU has to unlearn its strategy and relearn what it did in the 90s. In the 1990s, the Delors, so this is the effect still of the Delors Commission, it invested a lot in civil society capacity and creating developmental alliances, local and sectoral developmental alliances. It has to relearn it. It gave up due to a logic of the EU that member states are envious of local entities and they don't want to share resources with them. But if I can cite lots of very good studies from the 90s and also from the early stages of enlargement development in Eastern and Central Europe, new member states, that had very important effect, and that faded away. Now, civil societies are excluded, not only in the new wave, but also in the post-accession Eastern European countries. So the most important thing is that this multi-stakeholder governance is a wonderful idea. It's very important. That can collect information that can much better way. It can also give much stronger incentives to produce goods that can be seen as goods by many different metrics. So that's wonderful, but it needs a framework in which there is a space for it. In this situation, present, there is not much.
So we have only about 5 minutes left. I invite our guests to make a brief question. Are there any? Don't be shy. No, if there is no question, I'll directly invite our president of Istituto Affari Internazionali, to the floor concluding remarks of the conference.
Well, first of all, many thanks, grazie mille to all participants to this very inspiring seminar, which is another step in our dear cooperation between Istituto Affari Internazionali and German Marshall Fund. It is a cooperation in which we believe very much and that we want to strengthen with further initiatives. I think this today was a very fruitful exchange of updated information on recovery, on reconstruction, and it is, of course, a very timely initiative. One day before the beginning of the conference on reconstruction that will start tomorrow morning in Rome. It is also timely in a negative way because it comes a few hours after a terrible bombing of Ukraine, which reminds us every minute, if possible, how dramatic the situation in your country, in Ukraine, is. And it reminds us also what the Russian attitude might be in front of peaceful initiatives that deal with reconstruction, with recovery of the country. And it seems to me that there is a connection between these peaceful efforts to imagine a peaceful future for Ukraine and the bombing and the military initiative, the military pressure. It is as if there were a sign that comes from Moscow saying again, confirming again their terrible and wrong and criminal attitude. It is useful for us to have this exchange at the Institute of Affari Internazionali. We are, especially since 3.5 years, committed with the Ukrainian case. And we are more and more committed with our initiatives, with our researches, with our analysis, with our public interventions as well, since we are profoundly convinced of the fact that what is at stake is not a matter of control of territories, though important they can be. What is at stake is a principle, are serial principles of living together in our international community. And we want these principles to be maintained, to be strengthened. And these principles are opposite to the principles of those ones who think that problems can be solved with the use of force, of course. I was very happy to follow your works when it came to a very concrete sense of awareness of how important it is to overcome the fragmentation of your interventions in Ukraine, to boost an efficient recovery process. It is good to know how aware you are of this need. It is good to know how engaged you are in terms of coordination. It is very good to know, to learn from you how incredible the progresses were from this point of view. And this matches, in my opinion, on the other incredible progresses that you Ukrainians made in terms of progressive alignment to European standards. These are two good lessons that we can take as takeaways from this meeting today. It was also important, in my opinion, in general terms, to underlined how important the financial support is, how important the role of private sector is in the recovery process, but also how essential the institutional support is for your country. These are all important, relevant takeaways from this morning. I hope they will be relevant in the discussions tomorrow and in the pledges tomorrow at the conference. And I want to conclude with a small, very short, telegraphic and perhaps naive remark, which you will allow me since I'm new in the presidency of this brilliant institute. And the simple and perhaps even naive remark is the following. Since your work is so important and is so positive, also considering the difficult context in which you work, let's imagine, also with our modest help, if you wish, let's imagine a way in which we can tell about this progress, in which we can make an even stronger narrative of this process in course, in order to not only recognize what your value is, what your effort is, but also to encourage governments and, before governments, public opinion to go on with the essential, very, very useful and very wise support to Ukraine. So thank you again. Slava Ukraini, and let's have something to eat now.
Yeah, thank you to everyone who was with us today, to the speakers, guests, participants, and organizers. We are just finished a conversation that, in my opinion, was honest, deep, and very important. So this morning we heard the voices of those who shape recovery policy, who implement it on the national level, and those who support Ukraine with knowledge, resources, and solidarity. But also the voices of those who face the consequences of war every day in cities and communities, people who often don't have time to reflect or plan strategically, because today they need to bring back running water, protect a power substation, or repair a hospital. This way, a conversation between those who make decisions at the highest level and those who are forced to make urgent decisions in extreme conditions. And all of us are part of one single process. There is a lot of us to learn, and by us I mean project implementators learning from partners countries that already have quite effective practices. By us I mean representative of European countries learning how to react to challenge of this scale and how to come together. By us I mean a mayor of Ukrainian towns learning from the European Commission and EU ambassadors or politicians learning from the mayor of a frontline city. I wanted this to be an honest conversation, and I think it really was. So that's why it's important to end it honest too. Ukraine needs a sustainable institutional recovery architecture. It needs flexibility and strong support from its partners because war is still a major factor, and it needs predictable decision from the Ukrainian side even in such unpredictable conditions. We don't have the right to waste this opportunity. We don't have the right to fail building a strong recovery system. We don't have right to call something as successful if it's not. We can't call a set of separate projects a recovery strategy, and we cannot consider a victory transferring profit from frozen assets instead of confiscation of Russian assets in full. The cost of mistake is too high for Ukrainian, for Europe, for all of us, and when I say us, I mean everyone, from donors, ambassadors, ministers, mayors, activities, all of you. We are not just here to discuss what needs to be done, we are here to do it, to do more. Because we have the privilege to have this conversation while so many Ukrainians, hundreds of thousands Ukrainian defenders are giving up all they have and often sacrifice their lives for Ukraine to stand a chance. I want to tell you very short stories. Today, in this very hall, I met a former colleague of mine, Roman, with whom I worked 10 years ago, and he now works at the Ministry of Restoration. I don't know about that. But for the past 3 years, he was a soldier, but for the past 3 years, he had been in captivity. He spent nearly 3 years in a Russian prison. I couldn't help but mention it, so now I thank him for his military service and for protecting us. And thank you to each and every one of you. Thank you to GMF for supporting such an important Marshall Plan initiative. Thank you for IAI for this organization, and I truly believe we can do this and do it well. And let this conversation continue through real decision, project, and actions. In the next 2 days, URC will take place. I know the next URC won't happen in Ukraine, but I hope the day comes soon when the URC takes place right on the construction sites in every destroyed town and city in Ukraine. Thank you.
We would love to have you join us for lunch. If I could ask you to please follow some of our IAI individuals towards the back of the room. We look forward to having you. Thank you.